Hi, everyone. Welcome to the INTJ Live Q&A. And feel free to ask questions. AsuraPsych, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, give me 1 second. I didn't realize I had the window open for your stream, so I just heard you twice. I was like, what's going on? Okay, yeah, I'm Chris, AsuraPsych, certified MBTI practitioner, psychology graduate student. I work in coaching and personality assessments currently, and I do research on the side as well.
Excellent. And Jasper?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasper. I'm from the Metro DC area, and I'm an INTJ, 5-link-4, social subtype. My background's in business, specifically working with nonprofits, and right now I'm preparing for law school. So that's what's currently taking up my time.
Cool. And LiJo?
My name is Lindsay, or LiJo. My background is in professional ed, and I own a startup and do YouTube. So,
really great. And Michael?
I'm Michael. If we're doing backgrounds, there's too much. It's too much. It's a lot. But I'm very excited to be here. Never gone live before, so I love new experiences.
Yay, I'm happy to provide you new experiences. Yeah, and so feel free to check the YouTubers in this video. AsuraPsych, LiJo, and Countertype, their links will be provided below. They offer fantastic INTJ content, so if you want to be inside the layer of the INTJ mind, feel free to go into these channels and explore what it means to think like an INTJ there. And so, hi, my name's Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, and I facilitate the instrument in organizations. All right, so questions. How to deal with humans as an INTJ?
Just silence. Just like...
Anyone?
Learn type, know what you're dealing with. That was, I mean, when I got into type, I was more interested in reading about other types than my own, for sure.
Same.
Yeah. And I don't know about everybody else, but that's it seems so foreign and so alien, especially growing up, especially when you're younger. That just yeah. So I guess that's a more cerebral way to to go about it. Love INFPs. To the second part of the question here.
Yeah. Anyone else want to take a swing at the question?
I think one of the most important things that I learned that helped me kind of get better at interacting with others is learn that most people just have something to teach you. For INTJs, it's very easy to assume, especially the younger INTJs, 18, 20, that range, to just assume you know everything, or like you're going to be great at whatever you do and it's going to be easy and you don't need anyone else's help and just yada, 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 all that nonsense. But as soon as you open your ears to listening to other people and actually spend more time listening than you do talking, you'll grow exponentially, and you'll be able to much more easily communicate with others.
Excellent advice. As NI DOMs, do you guys feel like nothing really surprises you?
yes, nothing surprises me. I'm still waiting for the day I'm actually surprised by something a human does, or just, I mean, anything. And I think that, with dealing with humans and like them being very predictable, it's like, okay, well, we have that in our back pocket as a tool, but it still doesn't mean that we want to like use the tools all the time to do the human things. But it is good, like, everyone's saying, like, you have the tools of understanding, you can apply them, you know how to use them. Learning type really helps communicate better with people, being able to speak someone else's function language, and yeah.
Very cool. And Jasper?
I would want a little more context with the question, because I think the situations in which you're dealing with humans will greatly impact the strategy that I'm employing. If it's in a working type relationship, I might lean a little more heavily on my TE, and that's not as challenging. Whereas if it's in a social situation, then I would employ the Michael strategy, quickly figure out their type, and then leverage that. But similar to what Chris said, I think I've always shown an interest in the people around me, and so I feel like there's always something that you have in common, and sometimes you have to dig pretty far to get there, but I've never found someone that I didn't have some shared piece with.
Excellent. Yeah. Find the shared piece and it'll make the interaction a little easier. Good advice. And so, Bernadette, hi. And do you have any answers to this question? Or maybe
Hello. Could I get a bit more context on the question? Because I just jumped in, so I'm a bit easing myself into the question.
For sure, totally. It's how do you deal with humans as an INTJ? Like social interaction, what gets you through it?
I might need to think on this one a bit more. I can answer the part, like, I don't necessarily have strong opinions on like humans, other humans. Like, I just think of it as like a normal interaction. I definitely, like, I caught the last end of what Chris said, and I agree with that, in which it's like, there was something, like, I don't know why, but in one of my interactions with someone, there's a voice in my head that goes like, oh, maybe there's an insight that they have and a perspective that they have that supplements or adds to your own. So I try to look for that in my interactions with people. And I think it's definitely helped since I started getting into personality theory, because I can understand that better. I can see how someone else's perspective, even though it might be different to mine, or they might come to a very different conclusion, their perspective, like, I view it as more like, okay, that's really interesting. Like, now that you've said that, I can consider that, and that might complete my view of things. So yeah, opinions on INFPs. I like them. I talk to them a lot.
That's really amazing. Yeah.
I didn't even see that second half of the question.
Yeah.
I was planning to tackle that after. With finding someone who has the missing piece, like, that is really interesting. Like, it kind of wants things to fill in that last part of that perspective to make it like a whole understanding of something, possibly. It's interesting. I'm noticing a vocal pattern with INTJs. So this is with some INTJs, but when Jasper talked and then Bernadette followed, I'm like, wow, they have actually like a similar cadence to their voice. And it's one like that's kind of staccato-y. So it's like staccato talk, but it's very even. I'm sorry, that's very woo-woo, but I'm like, there's totally something there. But I digress.
Embrace the woo-woo.
Yes. Opinion on relationships with INFPs.
I mean, I've never been in a relationship with an INFP, so.
Yeah, what kind of relationship?
It's funny because we recorded, Joyce has an episode in the can that's coming up soon, this little behind the scenes of INTJs and INFPs, and this was a question that came up in that video. So maybe, I don't know.
Keep an eye out for that video.
Yeah.
To be announced. Yeah. Any advice on handling emotions in a more healthy, mature way?
The heavy-hitting questions tonight.
I would say, like, I always used to, when I was approaching type in the beginning, I really had this fascination with FE because I saw people who were so proficient in using FE in situations where I didn't feel comfortable. And I was like, I want to learn how to do that thing and be very good at it. And then, you realize that the best way at being able to handle emotions, especially outside of you better, is to connect with your own more and to allow yourself to feel your own spectrum of emotions, so that if someone is experiencing something, it's easier to relate to because you're allowing yourself to actually go through the darkness or the highs, yourself. So that's my recommendation, is embrace the darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea, following up with what you said, of just kind of tapping into that FI side of yourself. I feel like I always say that when I'm working with types who have FI in the function stack, that you don't want to try and emulate FE too much. And in my personal opinion, it's better to like build yourself up to be an authentic person with respectable morals and boundaries. And then once you have that, other people will kind of see that within you and respect you for that. And you'll be able to more easily and naturally get along with people, as well as handle your own emotions. But it can be easy if you get caught up in your own ego to kind of like lose your emotions there. And I think ego is one of the things that a lot of INTJs have to work on, is kind of tackling that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the, oh, I can do everything by myself kind of mindset.
Yeah, quite independent. Michael?
I'm thinking this is another Joyce is very scrupulous about cutting out like long silences, so there might be a lot of that in this video.
I feel like it's very telling of type. So yeah, in my videos I tend to cut out silences because I want it to be like as digestible for the viewer as possible. But I find the introverted types, so people with an I in their code, tend to have longer pauses than the extroverts that I interview on a whole. Extroverts tend to just jump in with an answer sometimes if they don't have like social anxiety and stuff confounding that. But the introverts they'll take longer to actually answer questions, and tends to be very consistent with the interviews that I do with people.
I think especially the IJs, because the IJs really like to like, what does this question mean, before they kind of spew out the response.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring this up because every single time I get one of this question, my first response is, I need a bit more context on that. I'm not sure if I can answer, because it's like, how do I say? I feel like it can be difficult for me to shift into more of a reactive mode. So it's like I'm trying to get and understand more before I respond. So yeah, I digress. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Are you like TE asking yourself, what is this question trying to achieve? What is the purpose for the context? I'm just trying to dig a little deeper.
Like, I'm not entirely sure, but it's like when I first read this question, it's like, any advice on handling emotions in a more healthy, mature way? What does more healthy or mature mean? Like, in what aspect are you trying to get to? Because it's like, based off of that, then I'm going to answer based off of what I think, which direction you're trying to go towards.
Are you showing too much? Or are you not showing enough? Like there's a few different ways that emotional health can be expressed.
So it's like, sometimes when I notice this a lot. It's like, I'm not the fastest to respond or answer to things because I want to think through it first and kind of go like, what does that mean when you're saying more healthy, mature? What are you trying to aim towards? Because then it's like, if you need to be more expressive, that's going to be, I might suggest something different too. If maybe you lean more towards over-expressing, like.
Oh, you want your recommendations to be good and like for the question, possibly? I'm trying. Okay, wait. I'll stop asking questions and yeah, my bad. But it seems like those are great pieces of advice for people to get more in their FI for sure.
I think it's like, on that note, like in terms of like emotions, I can probably speak from my own experience, but what's helped me is journaling a lot, and I talk about this a lot. And then in terms of journaling, what I do is like, I'll write down how I'm feeling, and then afterwards I'll think about it from a different emotional state of mind, and then I'll reflect on it, and then I'll think, this emotion, what is it telling me about what I like or dislike? And then from this, what do I need to do if there is something that needs to be done? Some emotions you just experience and you just let it go.
Yeah, the emotion is there and you're trying to figure out what TE things you can rectify to improve the emotion. I've had a TJ explain to me that the way they deal with their emotions is like they figure out why they're feeling a certain way and they try to eliminate the TE source of that if they can root out where it's coming from and then try to change that situation. I hope that I'm explaining it semi-decently. And so Mr. Coltrane asks, have you struggled with FE-related tasks? If so, how have you overcome these obstacles? What's your advice on doing better in these types of tasks?
What are some examples of FE-related tasks?
I guess you're a server in a restaurant or in a customer service role.
God forbid. God forbid.
You're hosting a baby shower for your little cousin.
They know better than that.
They would never find themselves in that situation to begin with? What would be your answer?
There is some truth to that statement in that I think INTJs, if they are able to, would probably plan their lives in a way such that they minimize these type of tasks, and that might be the healthy strategy. But I think in limited bursts, I can sort of hijack SE and get into a playful space. And that's more of how I'm going to relate to people in an extroverted socializing way without necessarily having to bring in a lot of the feeling function.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it kind of piggybacks off my previous response of the idea of like authentic FI, where I feel like if you can find the really nice balance between TE and FI, you can have an authentic self that is also like externally professional and organized. And like, as long as you're not like, 80-20 TE FI, you're not going to be off-putting to the FE people. And if you can find that right balance where you're just enough, you're at least aware of like, how you feel about the situation, how you think the situation should be going, and you're presenting in a TE style, you'll be able to kind of just ride through it. Or you'll just have a different communication style or different organizational style. I don't think FE tasks have to be completed in an FE way, just the same way I don't think like TE tasks can't be completed in the FE manner. It's just two different approaches to it. And if you find that balance between those two functions, you'll just kind of have a balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can kind of make up for the FE in the TE competency. Yeah. With TJs, there's a kind of professionalism to how they talk. Like with everyone on this panel, like it feels kind of professional and almost a little bit formal too. In stark contrast with like the ESFP panels. The ESFP panels are like very informal, cheery, and like they are like filled with energy, like kind of like pouring at you. Yeah. There's quite the contrast.
I mean, I'm still settling into the stream, I think, because we were hanging out for a couple minutes beforehand, and then all of a sudden Joyce was here and we were going live, and then Bernadette popped up, and I'm still kind of easing into it.
True.
I have a thought on this one. I was trying to think of an actual like good FE thing that I have struggled with. And one thing I've been thinking about recently is like, I do struggle when people are fishing for like emotional kind of feedback. So if that's like either like fishing for a compliment by being like, oh, I look so bad in this thing, or, when they're trying to get you to reciprocate some kind of FE for them, I struggle with that because I'm like, I'm not playing that game. I don't want to engage, and I don't want to give them that because it just, to my FI, it feels inauthentic. And so, I would say I struggle with that. And how have I overcome that is usually I won't give them the FE they're asking for, but I will kind of move the subject in a way that, if they're looking for a compliment, I find another way to do it that is authentic to my FI, without just playing their like, oh no, you look so good in that dress. What are you talking about, Susan? So I will come about it a different way, so that I have peace with what I'm doing, and then they feel some kind of reciprocation as well.
I completely relate with that. I remember at my old job, I didn't have like a management position, but it was like a pseudo management position where I was in charge of a few people. And I learned very early on that if you just told people good job for the little things, they would work harder and be happier to work with you. Like even like you don't have to like fake it. You could just be like, oh, they did a decent job. Tell them that. Tell them that they did a decent job, and then that can give that same kind of appreciation to the FE people sometimes, as long as you're authentic in that. But a lot of the times INTJs can get into the struggle where they just don't tell people that, or like they never tell people that, or they never express appreciation for those that are close to them. And that's going to be the pitfall you're going to fall into when it comes to the FE communications, because especially FE people in like workplaces, they want that kind of feedback. They want to be appreciated for their contribution to the work environment.
Yeah. During my panels with INTJs and ENTJs, like I'll try to look at your face to see if you're having a good time. And then I get afraid. I'm like, what if you're not having a good time? And what can I do to make you have a good time? And then, one of the INTJs told me, as long as you get us thinking, we're having a good time, Joyce. That's right. And that was nice of them to say. And so Christina asks, do you think there's too young an age to know your Myers-Briggs type?
Definitely not too young to know it, and maybe too young to accurately be assessed.
I always say that I don't like typing anyone under 16. I prefer 20 when I'm working in sessions, because even 18 to 20 is kind of like a wild ball, because you just got out of high school, you're living your life, you're developing. But like 16, you can at least kind of see it. But anyone under that, it's just like, I don't know. Like, what are you? You're a ball of development right now. Now, I think you could look into yourself and maybe know about yourself at that age, but I don't think other people are going to be able to accurately assess that.
Yeah, depends on the person, but 16 and under gets a little harder. Maybe you can narrow down some parts of their code, but other parts may be a little bit of an enigma.
At the same time, if you're a 7-year-old investigating your psychological type, that sort of narrows down the likely conclusions, right?
Yeah.
That would have been me, probably. I don't know.
At that age. Yeah, true that. And so Ron asks, how would you describe your SE inferior?
The beginning of this live stream that I'm still trying to recover from, where things are popping up, there are questions all of a sudden. I got a child running back and forth in the apartment above me, which has never happened before. He doesn't have a child, so I've got that going on. So it's like that.
A mystery baby.
It's like kind of being ignorant of your surroundings and the little things in your surroundings, while also being anxious and wanting to control it because you know that you're ignorant of it. It's like when I prepare for these streams 2 hours in advance, I've got like everything walled off. I make my bed, I do all these things. I tell my wife, I'm like, look, you have to stay out in the living room for 2 hours because I'm going to be doing this, and I need to make sure no one's going to come in the room. And it's like I have to be in control of this little sensory environment because I'm afraid of it going not the way I want it to. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I relate to that so much. Like, as Chris is saying this, I'm like, okay, well, I have my caffeine to sustain me. Then I have my hydration water.
Same.
And I was like, now I have a snack, like just in case I get hungry. Then I have my backup headphones in case my AirPods die. Then I have my lip balm in case my lips get chapped. And then I have my fan in case it gets too hot in the spot and I can adjust it as needed. Like, and this is just like normal, you know? And one time I was looking at myself prepare for either like a session or a stream or something like that. And I saw all of my stuff I had like next to my thing. And I'm like, this is what people are talking about when they're talking about like IJs being controlling. And like, I never had seen it before, but for some reason in that moment, I could just see very clearly all of my preparation and how normal it always was to me. And so, yeah, that's what it's like.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on your ESFP streams, they're like driving in a car on their way back from the grocery store.
Multitasking. Yeah. They don't care about the chaos. And also I edit the videos. So with the ESFP streams, there's like people opening the doors going like, hey, you want this? And they're like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, wow, unfazed at all. Well, the IJs are like, I'm going to prepare. So there's as little interruption as humanly possible. Yeah. And even then, I live with 2 SE DOMs. And so I also edit my videos because telling them that I'm filming isn't enough, because they'll still go in and go like, hey, Joyce, let me sing to you. And I'm like, don't sing to me. I have a stream right now. So it's interesting. Keeps you on your toes. And so, Bernadette, how would you describe your inferior SE?
Sorry, I'm still kind of in a daze, so I might need some time to think on this. Yeah, would someone else be able to answer first?
I can chat. And that actually is a perfect example of this question where there's so many tiny SE things that can throw off your entire focus and your ability to operate. And we don't like to operate suboptimally, at least I don't. And so I knew that in advance of this, like yesterday, I looked at the schedule for today and saw, all right, I have this panel here. I know that based on my sleep schedule, this is when my energy will dip. So I'm going to need to take an extra nap here so that I'm fully recharged by the time this starts, because talking to this many people can be especially draining. And I planned my entire day such that any potential things that were within my control could be mastered. And so this way, similar to what everyone has described, if something were to come up, we've got a lot of plans in place probably to address that so that it's the least invasive or interruptive as is possible. And I'm at a friend's house right now, and so I told everyone in the house, hey, this is what's happening, this is what I need, and that it's hopefully going to be respected this entire time. But I think we are also all speaking to the negative sides of SE Inferior, and I'd be interested to hear how people respond to some of the more positive or useful aspects.
Yeah, so it seems like with SE Inferior, it causes the NI to want to contingency plan on top of that and on top of that. So there's a huge planning element that IJs, especially INTJs, go through. And so that's one of the ways you can kind of tell apart like a lot of ISPs, so ISTPs and ISFPs, sometimes mistype as INTJ and INFJ. And one of the ways that you can tell these two types apart is how much do they plan and how much are they in the moment. And so as you're seeing now, the INTJs are answering, they plan a lot to make sure that every interruption is accounted for as humanly possible, whereas the ISTP or the ISFP will be more chillax with that in general. So just a little tip. And
I think it's like on that note, and I know you're aware of this, Joyce, but even before this live Q&A, like I emailed you because I was like, oh, what are the possible types of questions that generally come up? And then I try to like list down like, okay, I remember this experience, maybe that correlates to this type of question. So it's like there's, and I have that document up next to me right now, so I can refer to that if need be. So that's like one way in which like I notice I do that a lot. It's like, in my role, I have to like get on a lot of meetings, and then it's like I suspect that I might do this because if there is some type of interruption, I feel like I lose a train of thought. So I want to avoid that as much as possible. But I definitely do this whole thing of like, okay, generally these types of questions come up. What are some things that like would correlate with that type of question?
Yeah. And so personality hacker would explain that as with judgers or people who have higher up TE or FE, try to organize the outer world so that they have inner world freedom, so that they can roam the inner garden of their mind. So what Bernadette was saying, if I get an interruption, it'll actually throw me off my train of thought in my head. And so the NI and SI, it kind of likes to mentally free-form roam. And so to do that, they kind of have to have their environment a little settled in order to roam inside their mind, if that makes sense. And so what are INTJs like in their element and comfort zone?
Quiet. I can easily spend like 10, 12 hours a day home alone, just working on things, playing a video game, relaxing, something, without talking to anyone for days on end. Like, I tend to be very quiet. I am very easily annoyed by external noise, talking, people, those sorts of things. So my comfort zone tends to be completely alone for extended periods of time. And that's when I get the most work done. I never record when anyone's in the house, for example, for my YouTube videos. And I don't like live streaming when other people are in the house, but I'll do it. But, you know, I much prefer to be completely alone when I'm working on anything related to what is important to me.
I agree with all of that. I think, especially if I'm working on something that's meaningful to me, and especially if I'm in like a planning phase where I'm just getting everything in order to, be able to attack something. Because once you start working on things, it's, everything is thrown at you and you have to sort of dance around. But like when I'm in a flow state, preparing something that's actually that actually means something to me, then that's the time alone, like Chris said. Typically that's the time when time just sort of gets sucked away and I turn around like, it's 4 o'clock in the morning all of a sudden, which is very rare. I have to be very into something to get to that point, but it does happen.
Yeah, we were talking about contingencies before. I think I agree, like I really do like the alone time, because if I am alone and I already know what I need to do during that time or want to do during that time, and then if I'm alone in that space, it's like smooth sailing. Like we're good, there's no interruptions. I think what happens, when other people are involved in the situation or there's other people around, we're making these contingency plans on how they might interact with our space, interact with our time, and what kind of chaos could be a result of them being there. So we're having to kind of work overtime to be like, okay, well, I had to corner them like over in this room for this period of time. And then they're going to want to come out because they're going to want some water. And then we have to make sure that the dog's closed in this room so that the dog isn't barking when it's, and then I'm recording this thing over here. And so I think that's why we like the alone time so much, is because like we can just focus on our own train of thought and not have to worry about, because one person can bring a lot of sensory chaos into the mix. And so I think that's what's nice about being alone, and then just being able to kind of go with your train, like just go with your flow. And then I feel like I'm able to get a lot done that I want to get done during that time.
Mm. Jasper, Bernadette?
I would just to reiterate a piece of what Lindsay just shared. It's not even so much the specific distractions that other people could bring into a space. It's the potential for what they might introduce, that you just have a part of your mind that always has to be consumed with that readiness, which it seems like SE DOMs and auxiliary users have that. It takes no energy for them to just maintain that constant awareness. And so if something happens, there's no flinch, nothing seems to surprise them. And we aren't conceptually surprised by things, but by physical manifestations of occurrences, I would say that there's a lot of, okay, gotta rethink what's the newest best strategy in this moment. Mm-hmm. And so I would say an INTJ in their element has constructed an environment to eliminate any of that.
Yeah, and to create an intricate plan that can prevent your energy from being taken away from you. Seems like the SE takes away a lot of energy. Like adaptation, in the moment flexibility, just pivoting on the spot takes a lot of energy. And to prevent that unnecessary energy expenditure, there's some planning that goes into that. Yeah. And so if anyone else wants to answer this, they can, but I will move on to the next question too. What are INTJs like at school?
I don't think there's a consistent response for this, given the INTJs I've talked to. My school experience was, I thrived in the classroom. I often unintentionally became the teacher's pet. I would always sit at the front of the classroom in college so that I had the best access to the professor. I was always strategizing though. I would start off with the intention to set the best impression over the first few weeks, and then you could really coast after that, or you'd have a lot more leeway. They'd be willing to work with you because you have an established rapport that you can rely on. And so if you look halfway through a semester, you could be behaving the same as someone that the professor doesn't like, but because of that foundational relationship, they're viewing you much more highly, and that pays off tremendously. I think that small amount of additional effort up front more than pays off in the benefits that come afterwards.
Agreed. I'm wondering, what did your report cards say about you? And there was like that comment in them, if you remember.
I got in trouble for not paying attention very often. I mean, I slept through high school and failed my first 2 years of college before I quit for a few years and went back. So it depends on if you're asking me what I was like in school and high school versus when I went back to college for the second time, because those were two very different experiences.
Makes sense.
And to add a small bit to that, I will say that by around middle school, I had a self-awareness that, well, I would say as early as preschool, I felt like the other kids were not dumb, but sort of, they weren't seeing reality the same way that I was. And I was like, why don't you get this? Why are you acting like such children? Because they're literally 4. And so there was this sense that I feel sort of trapped here. I have these big thoughts, and I'm stuck in this kid body going through this required schooling experience. And so I think that's an experience that many INTJs probably have, and then how they respond to that differs greatly. And for me, it was try to wrangle the most comfortable situations for myself within the academic context without having to completely rebel. And so that meant in 8th grade, instead of going to regular classes, I designed an independent study so that I got to design my entire workday. And I got to work with the head of our honors program. And she's like, okay, what do you want to do today? And so I said, I want to go get lunch at 11 o'clock. I want to write this poem. And then I want to work on these things. She's like, sounds great. And so that was incredible. And then I got to high school and didn't immediately have access to that same sort of setup. And so after my first 3 quarters of my first year, I dropped out of high school and homeschooled myself for the remaining time.
Mm-hmm.
And so fortunately, I escaped the system, so I suppose that was my way of rebelling.
Mm-hmm. Jasper, I relate to that. I wonder if it's an NI-DOM thing to feel like a bit of an old soul at your age. I remember the first time I could have cognizant thought, like probably when I was like 4, and the first thing that went through my mind that I could think was, wow, my parents are such children. I felt older than my parents the moment I could think. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. And I only found other NI-DOMs who could actually relate to that on some level. So yeah, anyone else want to share?
I mean, it makes me think about the kids who have spent the last year unable to go to a physical campus, right? And that would have, I mean, I wonder how that's going to shake out in the end. I think for me, that wouldn't have been much different than my actual experience, especially in like high school. I was typically like squirreled away in the library or something. And I think I would have, I mean, thrived isn't the word, but just in terms of academics, I think it would have been the ideal situation just to be able to just stay home and just take care of things my own way at my own pace in my own time. But I worry about this entire generation of kids now who've spent the last year going through that experience, because I think what I'm describing is probably not the common, not typically the best way to, be young and in school.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And so if anyone else wants to answer the question, feel free to. I'll also show the next question as well. Yep, Bernadette.
I think there is a bit of a difference, I think, in how I approach school when I was in high school versus in university. I think in high school, for context, I grew up in Bali and my school was in front of the beach. So for most of the time, I wouldn't actually attend class. I would just go to the beach and spend a whole day daydreaming there, to be very frank. And I guess that's the answer to the previous question. What's my comfort zone? Daydreaming a lot. And like a lot of the times, like I would just attend class for the test at the end, and then I would just write the test. And then for most of the times, I would just go to the beach. When I moved to the United States for university, my parents gave me a set budget that they were willing to expend for my university costs. And then in the middle period somewhere, suddenly the Indonesian exchange to the US dollar, the value of the Indonesian rupiah dropped a lot. So what I had planned was enough for 4 years. Suddenly I was like, okay, I need to get school done in 3 years, right? So I felt like my head kicked into a completely different gear. I was like, it was very strategizing, in which I was like, okay, how do I take as many classes I need to take to finish at this pace? And I was very strategic with like the pass, no pass grades. So I would like research on like classes that were particularly difficult. And then I would take those as a pass, no pass, because I knew that I might not hit like a super great grade, you know, but I knew that it's like, I felt a difference there because I felt like as soon as I was like, okay, I want to do well in school, the mindset changed completely. And I was like, okay, I'm going to strategize to do well. I'm going to make sure that I finish. And the goal was like finish in 3 years, figure out how to reorder your classes, figure out like, I was very much like, what's the best way for me to study here? What's like personally for me, like what was the best way for me to like understand this lesson very quickly? And then, yeah, like strategically taking pass, no pass for like those classes that I was like, okay, this is going to be a bit challenging. Yeah, so I felt like my approach was very different for those 2 periods.
Yeah, you'll see with the TJs that you'll hear goal language. So they'll talk about a goal that they want to reach and then how to optimize your steps to reach that goal, like what Bernadette was just talking about. And this can result in certain types of behavior. Like I talked to an ENTJ female recently, and what she told me is that she'll interview the guys that she'll date to see if they fit into her goal for her life. I'm like, that is the most...
That's so interesting.
Yeah, TE gold language, for sure. And so do INTJs share belief about the nature of the universe? I've noticed certain types tend to have certain spiritual beliefs in particular, says Paul.
I'm agnostic, so I don't really have an opinion on this one. Like, I'm not a very religious or spiritual person.
What gets
outside
you
of philosophy.
Yeah. What would you characterize as your purpose? What keeps you going? What provides meaning in your life?
I mean, this is a lot. Yeah, no, go ahead, Lindsay. Please.
Well, I was going to say, I think for myself, what I've kind of reduced it down to is, you know, I have this blip of time on this timeline that I have the ability to create some sort of impact, you know, in the world, like some little ripple effect that can either create positive change or negative change. You know, we all do with any kind of energy we expend. We're rippling on something, you know? And so my personal philosophy is to make the ripples that I have the energy to create, ones that create a more positive impact for the people in the world around me than if I were to not be conscious of that energy I was expending. So, and I'm very cautious of time. I'm very tuned into like, we really don't have very much here. That's just how it is, you know? And so if I'm conscious and I respect this time that I have here, then I can leverage it the way that, you know, I think would be best. So time is my answer.
Beautiful.
I mean, mean, when it comes to the universe, I'm an idealist. So I think everything is mind. Ultimately, I think physical reality, everything, it's all just dissociated processes in mind. Bernardo Kastrup is the best writer, I think, working today on this. And his books are very short. They're very brisk. He's not new agey, actually has a lot of contempt for the sort of, for anybody who isn't into like the woo-woo kind of stuff, because it can veer off into that territory really quickly. You don't want to be the person on the internet who's talking about like quantum mechanics and everything. Don't be that guy. But yeah, I'd say I'd point to Kastrup working today, probably Schopenhauer. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Fascinating. Anyone else? Jasper?
I think to answer the first question, do INTJs share a belief about the nature of the universe? I don't think they do necessarily. I think there may be some underlying principles we could agree to, and everything that's been mentioned so far, I am on board with. I think if you had to summarize my own view and boil it down to the simplest language, completely lacking in nuance, it would be to create positive, sustainable change. And that sort of informs everything that I do in life. I hope it's making a non-negative impact, and I'm trying to do things in a way such that they are going to sustain themselves after I'm gone.
That's great. Yeah. With NI, it kind of factors in the long term, the future of something. So sometimes you'll hear language around sustainability that like Jasper mentioned. And so feel free to answer this question. If you guys want, I will move on to the next question too, to just show you what it is. And so thoughts on an INTJ becoming a psychotherapist?
I mean, maybe
That's
I'm
for
the
you,
one who has
Azura.
insight. Yeah. I'm in school. I'm applying for a clinical psychology program, so that is the goal. I think INTJs can be very good psychotherapists as long as they develop the skill of listening, which if you take psychology degrees, courses, and even graduate programs, you'll take entire semesters and courses on listening, just listening. Like, the only thing you're going to learn how to do is listen to people. Like, not talk to them, not answer their questions, just listen. And if that's a skill that you can develop as an INTJ, I think you'll be good, because you'll be able to see past the surface of what individuals' problems are. You'll be able to kind of, maybe they're feeling this inside and they just don't recognize it. And TE is good at offering people practical advice and helping them kind of overcome those issues if they can get to the point where they understand them.
You'd be surprised at the amount of NTs in the field of psychotherapy and counseling. I know a few counselor NTs. There's an INTJ YouTuber called Nicola, and she's also in that type of field, like with helping people with their emotions. Like, you'd be kind of like fascinated that that's the case, but it seems like because NTs are able to help intellectualize and provide action steps, they're well suited for these fields too. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, there's a YouTube, you might have seen him, Healthy Gamer GG. He's got like 500,000 subscribers, Dr. K. I think he's an NTP, like that would be my guess. And he's great. He's technically a psychiatrist, but he does coaching and therapy and stuff too. And I think, like, if you want a good example of how NT can help people, go check out that channel. Yeah.
I find a lot of NTs in that field, they sometimes get mischaracterized as NFs. I had a friend who was an ENTJ in one of these types of fields, and like, people used to think he was a feeler because he's in a type of field that you would normally typically associate with emotions and comforting emotions. But you'd be surprised at the amount of NTs in this. Yeah. So if anyone else wants to answer this, they can totally feel free to. I'm just going to go to the next question to give you a heads up on it. So how does FE Polar show up for you guys? Ron asks.
8 function theory. Disgusting. No, I'm just kidding.
Can someone explain polar to me? Like, what is, explain this to me. I mean, I understand in principle, but I'm just wondering, does anybody, Joyce, just a quick,
It's
where's
your
this coming
blind
from?
spot.
Why is it called
Socionics.
polar?
Point of least resistance.
Why is it called
So
point of
it's-
least resistance? I don't understand that.
Do you know that myth with an arrow to the knee, Achilles heel? It's like your Achilles heel, or the point where you don't really pay attention to. It's your trickster function. It is the one that you kind of neglect in your psych sometimes.
Is that the point of least resistance? I feel a lot of resistance when it comes to extroverted feeling. I just don't, I just, where is this coming from?
It just
It
isn't
shows
a
up. It's how I'm relating to Joyce right now is how it shows up for me.
Yeah, you can interpret it however you want. I believe that people of the type should be the ones writing the descriptions of that type. So if you explain how FE shows up in you, that's what the polar is, because that's what INTJ FE is.
For me, I could give some kind of baseline on the fact that I wasn't even like consciously aware of what FE might even be until like my mid-20s. And then at that point, I like kind of had a jarring moment where I was like, oh gosh, there's this thing I don't know how to do. Like, what the heck is it? And then and even now, it's like I still will have trouble respecting FE. I mean, like respecting the people, but like respecting the actual like articulation of the function, even though it's very valuable. But for me, where I would see it as being like a more like polar function, it's just like I just didn't see it as real. You know, I would see people doing things, but I didn't, you know, to me, that wasn't real what FE was until I got to be later in life. And I was like, okay, this is also a tool that can be used.
I find with certain INTJs or ISTJs who have polar FE, and they're a little bit more on the immature side too. I sometimes, when they give me commands, I feel like a minion for them to help be a good resource to accomplish a goal for them. But I feel like sometimes I don't feel acknowledged as a person. I think that's how the other side feels like.
Yeah, I can see that being real. We're sorry.
I think one way to look at it is that INTJs, like unlike ENTJs, they don't have the FI on their dominant axis. So it's like they're really not even that strongly opinionated about their own FI, let alone the FE of the situation. So it's just, it feels kind of awkward for INTJs when like they don't even want to talk about the FI and you're bringing up the FE.
Yeah, double uncomfortable. How about Jasper?
I don't know if I have anything to share on this.
For sure.
I'm reading some
Bernadette?
forums on it right now, but
Yay. Bernadette?
I will think about this a bit more.
Awesome. Yeah.
Also, FE polar, wouldn't that be ILI socionics instead of INTJ? I think there's going to be some differences in theoretical meaning there because their definitions are different, but
It is true. Good for bringing that up as well. So there's this element of introverted intuition where it's kind of like a pressure cooker. It takes time to kind of form its opinion. As you can see, how like Bernadette takes a while for it to settle in and then fully process and then get back to you. I can relate to that a lot too. So, and I can be kind of take a while to collect itself, which is really cool. And so Marketing Muslim asks, how would you combat the negative INTJs are cold, emotionless robots stereotype?
well, ask yourself, are you cold and emotionless? Like is that something you need to work on?
I think honestly though, don't be too self-conscious about it because that just makes the situation worse. I think. I think it's honestly just being authentic and being like feeling free to be you is, you know, I think like hopefully we all are right now, right? I mean, are we coming off that way? You know what I mean? I hope not.
As we all look at the
the more you resist it, the more you fight it, and like are doing this meta commentary with yourself, saying like, I need to be this other way. It's only going to reinforce the, I guess, the chill.
I think there's kind of like two sides to this, because a lot of people, when they see like the INTJ cold emotionless robots, they also think of them as being kind of like aggressive. And I don't think that's the stereotype I actually see with INTJs very often. I think a better word would be like distant, where it's like it's hard to get an INTJ to want to express any sort of emotional expression. I feel that's the same with ISTJs, though, in my opinion. I think it's just that tertiary FI gang.
Michael once used the word unapproachable. Do you find that people tend to find INTJs on the when they first meet them as a little distant and a little hard to approach?
I can relate on that, because that's actually something that's been called out to me a lot. And I wasn't even aware that I was giving that impression off, to be honest. In high school, a lot of my friends would tell me oh, you just don't seem like you want people to kind of approach you. And then I would just be like, is that really the case? I had not noticed that at all, to be honest. It's I think it's even though I wasn't very present in high school, I was, for the most part, I think I tried to be very respectful of other people. And the same comment has been told to me at my workplace, in which it's my manager literally took me to the side and said hey, Bernadette, maybe you should sit with people during lunch, and maybe you should talk to people instead of going on your walks, And then I told them that honestly, for me, the walks were really important, because after talking to people for a while, I felt really tired, and the walks were recharging for me, in the middle of the day. But then it's given that input, I was okay, I'll put in more effort into doing that. Thank you for giving me that suggestion.
I find the most private of all 16 types are the INTJ and the ISTJ. I find that they can be very private about personal FI matters. They can keep their cards very close to their chest. And so that can come across as there's this barrier of invulnerability sometimes, as Personality Hacker would put it. Yeah.
I describe my social life, even growing up, as I could take it or leave it. If somebody comes up and talks to me, I'm not going to be mad at them, but at the same time, I'm never going to go actively seeking to go talk to somebody. So that just leads me to be the person who always sat alone and no one ever approached me at school, for example, or I sat in the back of the class and didn't talk to people next to me, type of thing. But that was just me. Might not be every INTJ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've become the person that approaches people, but not until my 30s.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And so what do you think about the MBTI subreddits?
Great, accurate always.
Yeah, 100%.
Just a fountain of great information, accurate.
Great questions that they ask there.
Fantastic question.
I have one of my recent videos, I did a video on INTJ internet groups, which is kind of like a giant troll, which I don't know if everyone knew it was a troll or not, but it's funny. I think sometimes the things that people believe are associated to type, which are just very behavioral and not cognitive. And, but the thing is I understand people are learning. I understand people are on their growth journey, and they're asking questions, and they're, looking at different things, and, all this stuff can be new, fun, and exciting. But, it can be really interesting to see things oh, do INTJs wear red shirts? And I'm just well, okay.
It's interesting. With some INTJ stereotypes, there is a little bit of truth to it. The INTJ I know in real life, he stereotypically wears black shirts 90% of the time. So, I mean, there's that.
I have a reason for that. And I think it's because it's not that we particularly like black, but we're fearful of light colors because of the chaos that could be manifested on them. At least that's me. I know if I'm wearing a white shirt, it will not stay white. It won't. There's gravitationally, anything that's liquid will just end up on it, And then you have the whole thing of okay, well, now if this is a different lighter color, now I have to does it match with this? I don't know, And so it's more just okay, it's simple, it's foolproof. No chaos can no chaos can happen on this shirt.
Colored shirts are, for me personally, are also like distracting. Like I have one red shirt I wear at nighttime sometimes, and I'll just be sitting in my chair and I'll look down and be like, I can't get this red shirt out of my peripheral vision. So I need to go change shirts because it's distracting me.
Yeah, say what you will about the stereotypes. This one is actually a thing. Yeah,
it's true. Yeah. So what is your relationship with FI? Would you say it's playful as opposed to serious?
I'd say it's private for me, personally. Like it's the thing that I probably am least likely to share with anyone. Like even if you poke and prod, in terms of how I like legitimately FI feel, like how you might see with an ISFP or an INFP. Now I can give you like a TE explanation of the FI, but that isn't the same thing in my opinion. And for me personally, it's very hard to crack that shell and actually get to the FI. Even for me, like trying to do it myself.
I think I can relate to that. Like, that's definitely something that I can relate. I actually feel like I have very strong FI, like internally. It's like, and I recently noticed this, that whenever I would share projects that I've been working on with my friends, I would tell them about my plan and where I was trying to get to, but I would leave out the part about why it matters to me or why it's personally, like why I'm personally motivated to do it. Like I would just share like, here's where I'm trying to get to. Here's what I'm doing to get there. Do you think this is a reasonable plan? Do you think I'm going to be able to get there by this amount of time? And then it was only later that I noticed, like after seeing that this occurred like repeatedly, I was like, oh, I leave out the part about why I want to do this, you know?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I was talking earlier about like feeling like a little bit of a minion, right? My dad earlier today, he wanted me to help him with his phone and to help him download apps and to get his phone set up. And he would give me like TE orders as to what to do with his phone. He's an ISTJ. And I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of a minion serving your aims. And I don't know why I'm doing it. So it feels kind of weird because the FI is so private because he's not telling me why he wants me to do it, but he's telling me what to do. And so I'm like feeling kind of orchestrated in a sense, but there's an element of fog around why am I being told to do this in this specific way? It leaves me in the dark with where the FI is in the ITJ sometimes, because you only hear the TE, like what needs to happen rather than what's motivating you to want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I would definitely like summarize that FI for me. If I were to put it in one word, I've always described it as motivation, like internal motivation, like the drive behind why I continue to do something. But I don't even know if I do this purposely, but I don't tend to tell people the why behind why I do something.
Yeah. That's why I said that INTJs and ISTJs are the most private of types for that very reason that Bernadette stated. And so y'all can answer the question if you want about FI. I'm just going to show the next question too in case y'all want to answer.
I also think that INTJs, while being private, also tend to be super nosy about other people's whys. It's like as soon as someone else is like, oh, I want to do this thing, we're like, but why do you want to do that thing?
Yeah.
And I had a guy pull me aside at work a few years ago, and he goes, you're one of like the nosiest people. I don't even feel like I'm nosy because like anytime I ask you to do something, you're like, why do you want me to do that? It's like I don't know, if I just need to have the complete picture before I feel comfortable doing a thing. What is your intention with wanting me to do this thing essentially?
Yeah.
And how is that going to affect me?
With the FI, I agree with it being like it is very private for us. And the one time I felt really called out on it, this was like maybe like a year ago, is like I was speaking to Antonia Dodge, and she was like kind of doing like a pre-interview sort of a thing with me, asking me a bunch of questions for this NT panel. And I was giving her, like, as related to my FI, I was giving her my very like textbook like staple PR answers, you know, like I'm like, oh yeah, this and that, you know. And she like, it got to the point where we're like 45 minutes in and she's like, you're still not giving me what I'm asking for. She's like, it's in there, but you haven't reached it yet. And she kept calling me out on my BS like over and over again. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's like seeing past my fake answers to my actual FI. And I felt so vulnerable, but I also felt so challenged in that moment to be like, okay, she's right. I need to like dig a little bit deeper and like pull out something that I can give. And that was really interesting, but I had never been like called out on that level. It felt good in a weird way.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And so what is the most important thing to you? This is like directly getting to your FI.
It's like the most general question ever. Like,
that makes it easier to answer. Gives you the ability to answer however you want. But of course, you have private FI, so you might just give a very generic answer to save your FI.
if I had to give a very general answer to the general question, it would just be pursuing my path. Whatever is interesting, or I would say whatever calls out to me in life is whatever is currently the most important thing to me. Like, I'm the kind of person who, like, if I got a job or a research position that required me to get up, leave my hometown and family behind and go move halfway across the country, I could do it. And that's because that's what calls to me. I have to follow those types of things. And if I don't, I feel like I'm kind of like fading inside.
It's interesting. Yeah. When you follow your calling, though, the thing about a calling is that you're the only one who can see it. Other people, they can't see your specific calling. So sometimes when you follow that, you'll have people who won't know how to support it or how to think of it because it's so personal and customized to you, which is why a lot of people have tension around their area of their calling, because in one hand, your soul screams at you to want to follow your heart in your calling. But the other hand, there's so much social backlash through trying to do the things that make your heart happy. And so there's that push and pull over there.
I think I relate to that sentiment. Chris or Asura?
Either one's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Like when there is a reason why I decided to go to university, specifically in the United States, and specifically in Silicon Valley. Like, there is a reasoning. And I remembered when I decided to make that move, I'm an only child, so it was very difficult for both my mom and my dad. And then I told them, it's not an indication that I love you any less, but I have to pursue this thing.
Right.
You know, it's been a very defining quality about me. And I think maybe it can be interpreted as selfish, because it's very like, if this is my calling, I'm really sorry if that's going to upset you, but I kind of have to go for this.
Yeah. There's this fear of outgrowing people. When you follow your calling, it's possible you might outgrow some of the people close to you, like your family or your friends. But it's important to remember that if they're your friend, they'll grow with you. So they'll try to grow in a way that can allow for your calling to exist in your relationship with them. So you don't have to sacrifice your calling to maintain your relationships. Yeah.
I think the positive side of this in our unrelenting pursuit of our own passions is that we're really supportive of other people pursuing their passion and not wanting to hold them back in any way from that.
Absolutely. If somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, I've got this thing I really want to do, I'm the first person to be like, all right, well, first I'll see if it's realistic. But if I think that they have a realistic goal or idea in mind, then I'll be like, do it. Like, just, do it. Quit your job if you need to, start this startup you want to do, just do the thing.
Interesting. I'm thinking about the invulnerability aspect of the ITJs we were talking about. And I'm wondering if that's why INTJs tend to score like Enneagram type 5 a lot, because with Enneagram type 5s, they're known as having a sort of invulnerability, building like a wall of knowledge or insight to protect them from closeness almost sometimes. And that kind of aligns with, sometimes INTJs have a distance to them. So resulting in a lot of them typing as type 5 or type 1 in the Enneagram. And so anyone else want to answer this question? I'll also show the next question too, in case either question appeals to you all. Any good book recommendations for a bored INTJ here?
Just blind recommendations. I mean,
I don't even know what type you are. I can't even.
yeah.
I like fiction more than I like nonfiction. I do most of my research and learning through like YouTube and stuff. So if I'm going to recommend a book or books, I would recommend the Night Angel trilogy. That's my favorite book series.
Favorite books, maybe, and then those would, I guess, count as recommendations.
Sure.
Jasper.
Favorite books? Well, I did pull up my book list, so I was ready for this question. But I would say, if specifically it says a bored INTJ, and so if you haven't read Mastery by Robert Greene, I would read that.
It does say INTJ.
And
Sorry.
then I would couple that with Range by David Epstein, so you get two different perspectives on whether it's better to be a super specialist in a field versus having a wide array of disciplines that you have skill in. Those feel like very INTJ books that I enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. So you guys can all answer this question. I'm just going to also move on to the next question to let you guys answer either one that you feel fit to.
I just think it's funny that you read the question and I was like, I don't know what type you are. That essay,
Just filter out other INTJ information.
yeah, just don't pay attention.
I feel you on that. And so what are your favorite INTJ characters in media?
Does this mean fake people or real people?
Up to you. So the thumbnail of this video is I think the main character from Queen's Gambit. And she's
It's a
an
good
INTJ.
example. Yeah, that's a good example.
And as you guys are thinking about that, I'm also going to show the next question, but it's up to you.
Oh no, wait, we're going
question.
to
Too much essay.
Sorry.
The best example of, and it goes to the books question too, and it's a series of books, and also they did a season of a limited series on PBS a few years ago. Is Wolf Hall, the Hilary Mantel books. Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies, and the third one just came out. It's The Mirror and the Light, and they're about Thomas Cromwell, who was sort of worked his way up to be in like the gray eminence in Henry VIII's court. And I think that's probably of recent media, I guess, that I've experienced. It's the best example, and extremely in-depth. I mean, especially when you go through the whole book series. But Mark Rylance played Cromwell in the PBS series, and I think did a really good job of embodying that character.
I would say with the reading aspect, I tend to like go less towards the books and more towards like I will spend hours like in like a peer reviewed journal, and I like going through actual research because I'll be chasing something mentally, and I'll get I'm like, oh wait, this thing could actually be related to this, and then it would. And so then I'm trying to like triangulate like these three things. And so I'm like reading like ravenously the research that's related to these things until either I solve it or I just get so exhausted that I can't, read anymore. So usually like the things I read for me personally will be less for kind of just like the novelty or enjoyment, like the FI, but it'll be more for like this weird NT hole that I get stuck in. But I love it. So.
That's fantastic. And so Vale asks, how would your parents describe you when you were little? How would you describe you?
I have no memory of it, and I'd have to ask. It's the honest answer. I have a terrible. It's just. I mean, it's just. I have wisps, and like it's extremely hazy.
I was kind of a brat, to be honest. I argued and questioned everything all the time. But I was raised by grandparents because my mother passed away when I was young. And, you know, there's like a disconnect kind of when you're raised by grandparents as opposed to parents because it's like a whole generational thing. So I think for me, it was just I always, you know, especially the older generations has to be even more traditional than your parents were. So you have, as an NI dom, it was just like, why do we have to do this? Why do I have to do this all the time? Or why do we have to do it this way? So I was always questioning things and getting in trouble for that. But I kind of grew out of that around like 16, 17. And now I get along with grandparents better.
This
I
one
think-
actually, oh, sorry.
No, go Bernadette.
Okay. The one that my parents, a nickname that my parents used to give to me when I was really small was researcher, little researcher, because whenever I'd get very interested in a topic, I'd want to like absorb everything about it. Like I would just be very like going down a rabbit hole of reading like research papers on just that specific topic and just like going very, very in depth on that. And that was something that they noted that I would do a lot, was just like researching a lot. It was like, and it was always very like one specific, like one area of focus at a time. So at one point, like in high school, I had started a bakery, and then I wanted to understand the molecules and how they interacted, why certain things were combined in certain ratios. And then I remembered, like, I went through all hundreds of chocolate chip cookie recipes, compiled them into an Excel sheet, and then I was like, what's the ratio between all these dry ingredients and sugar and water to come up with like the ultimate chocolate chip cookie recipe, basically. So it's like researcher is definitely like something that they would, to this day, they would tell me a lot. The other one that I get a lot is independent, very independent.
So it seems like what gets INTJs in the flow state is in consensus, not people, like activities that just don't involve people. Yeah, and research is such a type 5, like little kid thing. I can't. Yeah.
When I was young, they would sign me up for like the team sports things on weekends and stuff. And I would just like sit on the soccer field while they were playing. I was just revolting. Like, oh, I do not want to be here with other people doing things on the Saturday when I could be at home wasting time in my own way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my parents would say that, like, well, actually, I was just with them like 2 weekends ago. And we were talking a little bit about this, and very much like, you know, you had like a big imagination, but that kind of included the independent aspect. So like, because I was like in this like cerebral world, I was okay being independent because my world and my interaction existed like not in a very physical place. And so like I didn't need friends, I didn't need stuff. The things that I think, you know, my mom is an ISFP, and you know, she'd always try to like, you know, have me do like arts and crafts and like, you know, little things. And like I just wasn't really interested in like, you know, like coloring on a coloring book. Like I just wanted to go climb up in this tree and just like hang out there and like talk to like my friends, you know, and just be in a different space. And so she was like, oh, you're impatient. She thought I was impatient at that point, you know, with like these things, but it was just like I had no interest in coloring, you know, but very independent, didn't need like the stuff very much. And when I guess looking at myself, you know, very similar, very independent, very happy doing my own thing. I remember that I was like 7 or 8 and I got a old video camera from my grandfather, and like I started making stop motion videos. And like, that's what I would do for like days on end. I don't know how I got the idea to make stop motion videos, but like, and I would just like start the camera, stop the camera, and like move my toy and like start and stop. And I was just like, that was great to me. Like that was heaven.
That's amazing. And so Mamu asks, how do you explain NI insights to people? What is NI?
I always feel bad if I'm the first one to answer, so I try to wait a second. But so here's an interesting thing if you want to think about like explaining NI and why it can be weird versus not weird. So think about like go talk to ISFPs. And if you talk to ISFPs, you'll see them tell you their NI without filter, which is why they sound woohoo a lot of the times when they're talking. And it's because there's just no extroverted judging filter for the NI. So when you're talking to like INTJs and INFJs, their NI goes straight to extroverted judging and becomes rationalized. So NI, if you want to become a healthier NI Dom, you learn how to rationalize your perceptions. And then you give them to people in that form. But I think the ISPs, especially the ISFP, tend to be what this looks like when it doesn't go through that filter. And that's why, at least I have ISFP friends who like sometimes they'll just say stuff in the NI realm. And I'm just like, what are you trying to get at? And it's because there's no filter there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always draw out that thread. I agree with that completely. And it also depends on what kind of conversation you're having, right? Like if I'm trying to say, no, stop, don't do this because X, Y, and Z, then you have to sort of, you have to draw that thread logically. If I'm just hanging out and it's like talking about the universe, whatever, then it's, I don't, just however it comes out, evocatively, I don't know.
Or the other answer is just talk to NPs. Because like the NPs don't care if you sound like a woohoo.
Yeah. And I find the NPs are able to translate NI sometimes because they like to guess a lot. So NE's like, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And eventually they'll land on it. And so sometimes if an INTJ or an INFJ has an NP trying their hardest to infer what you're actually saying, it'll actually come out well.
I think...
Sorry, you go ahead. You're fine.
I relate to what Chris said, in which for the most part, I don't try to explain the NI insight because I understand that the way that I'm interpreting it is subjective to me. So for someone else, because it's a subjective experience, they're not necessarily going to understand it. So for example, my future vision of myself is as a lion. And the way that I understand that in terms of like traits to develop, I understand that subjectively to mean I want to cultivate being more assertive, for example. But if I just told that to someone else, they're going to be, but why does a lion symbolize assertiveness? It doesn't make sense because it's a subjective process. What I have noticed and what I tend to do in my current role, and to give more context, I work in sales. So what I do is like I relate this, and this was a helpful insight that I had from practical typing. They had one picture that I remember now in which it's like NI, abstract, and TE is concrete connections between that. So I relate the concrete part basically. And usually what I do in sales is if I have an insight and it's pointing me to do something, I'll go ahead, I'll track the metrics, and then when I share it to the team, I'll go, do you want these results? If you want these results, these are what I did to get those results. And then I communicate that part basically.
Yeah, I'd like to explain what Bernadette was saying a little as well when she was talking about the line, right? So there's a difference between NI metaphors and NE metaphors on a whole. Because extroverted intuition, NE, is external, it's dealing with external ideas, and it's kind of perceiving external ideas and kind of remixing them together, right? And because of that, it's easier for people to, like, off the bat, understand an NE connection. So in practical typing, they use the example asta pasta, right? It's like a easy connection between those two things. And it has an easier time with conveying concepts to other people because it starts out external. Whereas with NI, when Bernadette was explaining the line, it requires you to have the frame of mind to understand what the line means. So sometimes NI users, they'll be able to articulate their concept, but it takes time to decode sometimes because it originates from the self. Jung says that all introverted functions are subjective. And what subjective means is that it originates from you. And so it requires a little more inference to sometimes infer what the NI user means, even if they can communicate it. And it takes time for some NI users. So that's a way to tell apart any NI, one of the ways. And so anyone else want to answer this question? I will also show the next question too.
Yeah, I have so when I had first read that question, I thought of it a little bit more of how NI is developed, how NI is working its own process. And the way I like to look at NI is I imagine NI is like a filing cabinet. And inside of this filing cabinet, there are multiple files that are constantly getting pieces of paper put in, and this is happening in the background, right? And it's getting pieces of paper that are put into these different files. Sometimes we're consciously aware that we're trying to connect something, so we're working on a specific file, but other times just pieces of information are just going into one of these files, right? Just getting filtered in to one of the files that exists there. And then at some point, you'll get to a place when all of a sudden that file is complete and you're like, oh, this concept now is finished. And now this complete file I can apply to lots of things. This file could be one thing I was thinking about the other day was I've been playing a lot of poker recently, and about how the different positions in poker give you leverage on different opponents, and how your position in different things in life has a lot of the same effects. So anyway, poker analogies aside, this position, this concept of position as it relates to these other components was kind of a file that I didn't really know I was consciously working on, but all of a sudden it came together for me and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, this can be now used in different ways. So I think that's what NI is doing all of the time. We're filtering information into these files, these singular files, and now when that concept is complete, it can be used.
Yeah, I see them as bubbles. So it's almost like you have a bubble of a theme, and you're trying to if things fit into that overall thematic bubble, you'll try to tie things into that thematic bubble, perhaps. And then but these groups of thought are condensed takeaways you get from different things in the SE. So you're real-time observing data, and from that, you kind of condense away takeaways, the overall underlying pattern or meaning that you can take away. Yeah.
LiJo, what you said there, it reminded me of the young ones here aren't going to remember this, but back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you would download an image, it would start from the top and you'd have to get the whole image. Mm-hmm. And it's with any types, it's as the image is downloading, they're guessing.
Yes.
And they're throwing out, oh, it's this, and who knows, they might hit it right on the spot. But the NI type is all right, 100% downloaded. Oh, look, it's a horse. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes back to the concept where introverted functions are fully baked and extroverted functions are half baked. So the NE function is going to guess all the way there. Is it this? And while the NI user will wait until it's 100% to share. So it's going to wait until it's zoomed out and, it's from the outside looking in, and it's reached a sense of completeness. It's almost I see J's in general or NI as a conceptual finisher, while the NPs are conceptual starters. They'll throw out many ideas. The NJ is waiting to wrap it up in a pretty package. And then it's okay, I fully understand this in a way that I'm comfortable with sharing. And then they'll give you that well packaged idea with the ribbon on top.
I'll just add that sometimes it can be frustrating when you have an NE user who is blasting you with guesses, and you're if you just give me the allotted time that I've asked for, I can fully explain it and ensure that you are getting the nuanced image that I'm wanting you to get. Sure, you could get if we're using the horse example, you can see, oh, wow, you guessed it was the outline of the horse, but I want to fill in the whole photograph and tell you about the color and why the horse is there. And you won't necessarily gather that just by guessing. And so I would say that certainly there's a category of NI insights that are not easily explained, and some things are best demonstrated through action. And so it's like, well, you'll see in 10 years that I was spot on with this. So
yeah,
that's probably a really rewarding experience as well.
Mm-hmm. A great way to put NI is there's this piece of glass, and then there's fog on that glass, or mist. And as the mist is like slowly becoming clearer and clearer, or like the image is becoming more clear because the mist is fading, you're more likely to see what's on the other side. And the NI user is waiting until they have a good sense of the gist of the other side before talking sometimes. Mm-hmm. Oops. So you all are free to answer the last question, but this question right here is, as INTJs, what are your biggest obsessions, and what do you think you can find? Do you think you can all find a common ground you all obsess over?
I find my obsessions tend to be, well, I have like a general long-term theme to my obsessions, like success on YouTube and, getting into a PhD program, yada, yada, yada. A lot of the times my obsessions within that are kind of sporadic and all over the place. And I really find myself interested in spending amounts of time on these things. And it happens very randomly. And I'll put like 5 or 6 hours into something at one point, just because I'm really excited about the possibility that it presents. Like I've started streaming on Twitch recently. So the other night I got excited about it. I watched like 7 hours of like how to do Twitch stuff. Then I spent 5 hours creating overlays for myself. And then, 3 more hours doing this and that. And by the end of the day, I was burnt out. But I was like, oh man, that was really, like, it felt good to put that much energy into it because I was excited about obsessing over things. So for me, those obsessions they follow a same theme, but they're usually kind of scattered within that theme. And I direct a lot of energy in short bursts at them.
Yeah, I think it depends on what project I'm working on. I'll get obsessive about it, and that could be either learning something or making something. But it kind of depends on what year it is. There's something else. I mean, one year I might be obsessed with type, and I sort of will just read, absorb everything, try to embody that thing. And actually that's something that I will do. And I don't know if everyone else relates to this, which is if I'm absorbed in something and I get obsessive about it, I feel I have to sort of embody that thing in a way. Like I have to believe the thing that I'm whatever I'm poring over for if it's 6 months or a year. I remember learning about astrology, and it's not my thing, but in that 6 months where I was like just absorbed in like classical astrology, reading Valens, reading the medieval stuff, reading the Arabic stuff, and then all the psychological stuff today. Like I was deep in it, and I was embodying that thing. And it's almost like I need to know what it's like to truly, like, I can't think of another word, but embody, but to really fully be absorbed by something, because that experience for me is part of learning. And I could be, I mean, I've learned temperance over the years, but there were times where I could be a nightmare depending on what I was obsessed with at that point. Or if I'm making something, if I'm working on a writing project or something, then I am fully absorbed in whatever that thing is. So like, if it's a romantic comedy, then everybody around me is happy. Typically it's not, so.
I think for myself, it's like very much the solving, figuring out process, which can apply to a bunch of different things. But you know, like, let's say it is in like type, you know, and like that's kind of the bucket that I'm in. I'll, you know, NI is always narrowing in. And so there's this point when like you're kind of like looking at two different things and you're starting to make a connection, and like the narrowing down is coming closer and closer. And you're like right at this spot, right before you get to like where you want to be with that thought. And like that is like my most obsessive point. Like when I'm on my way to solving something in my own perspective, you know, and I'm like almost there, like I will be in that almost like I have to get to the end at that point. And that's like when like the world could explode around me and I'm like, nope, I'm figuring this thing out before, you know, this day is done. So like that's where I actually see my obsessive nature, is like that solving, figuring out process, which can be in, you know, multiple different buckets.
LiJo, do you find that failure or like a resistance to complete the goal is almost like an energy multiplier for you? Because that's how it is for me. Like for example, if I'm playing a video game and I get stuck on a boss, instead of getting frustrated and quitting, I just like keep going, and I get more frustrated, and I'll just keep doing it for hours. Yeah. I stayed up till like 7 a.m. one night because I got stuck on a boss in the game, and I had spent like 8 hours on that one boss, and then it was just like, oh, I finally did it, and just passed out.
Yep. It's like, it's when you're getting to that really close point, you know? And it's like, if you're really far away, I'm like, okay, you know, like it's not happening today. I'm not worried about it. But if you're like close enough where it's in reach, it's like, oh, it's happening.
I relate to that too. I think it's like whenever there's a perceived setback, I think it actually, maybe counterintuitively, I double down on it a lot more, and it can feel very all in for me. Like, I remember recalling this and thinking like, I guess it makes sense why they peg INTJs as villains if this happens, you know. It's like, I guess it makes sense then, because it is very much like setbacks for me make me go like, okay, I need to double down on this. I need to go even harder on this. And then it's very like, I don't know if it's something with like the NI-FI locking in on that, like this thing, you know?
I always say that I think the ESFP represents the archetype of the young hero, and the INTJ like the old jaded villain. And in fiction, they butt heads, both of them get knocked down. They're too dumb and they refuse to give up, so they get back up and they keep fighting, and you just see that for like half of every movie ever made. And I think that's like that archetype displaying itself, where there's just so stubborn they won't give up.
Yeah, you can't ask that FI to give up. FI is persistent when it cares. And so do you think an inability to connect emotionally for a lot of especially unhealed INTJs can be attributed to the dismissive attachment style disorder rather than a personality type?
So this is an interesting question. I strongly relate to the dismissive attachment style. I'm like 100% dismissive attachment style. And I don't know if that's something that every INTJ is going to feel like. But I feel like of all the types, the INTJs are going to be the most prone to falling into dismissive because of that shy FI where they just don't want to share it with anyone.
I 100% agree with that. That INTJs, you know, FI in the third spot, and also because INTJs tend to be Enneagram 5, and Enneagram 5s tend to be dismissive attachment style. That just confounds it a lot. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on this? Feel free to answer it. I'm just going to show the next question.
Well, just to kind of give context to people with attachment styles, there's kind of like these categories of, are you others positive and negative, and are you self positive and negative? And this creates kind of 4 types. And the dismissives are self positive and others negative, which means they have strong confidence and faith in themselves, but no confidence and faith in others. And I feel like the INTJs tend to be the types who become the most self-reliant because they're so individual in attempting to chase their goals, which is why I think that you see that they're more prone to falling into that state of, oh, I can do it, and others probably aren't going to help me get there, which kind of feeds back into that negative feedback loop.
Yeah. I've met probably like around 100 INTJs so far. I can't say I've met one, what was the opposite of dismissive? Anxious. I've never met one anxious attachment style INTJ yet. I can be proven wrong, but that, like, I'm just telling you the trend of who I've met.
So how does that manifest? I'm not too familiar with the attachment styles. Like, what is the anxious style?
Anxious
present
is
as?
a clinginess. So negative view of self, positive view of others. You co-regulate with other people. You kind of need people on your kind of like, when they pull away, you pull closer. So the anxious attachment style pulls closer when you're having a fight.
Most common in NF types. At least what I've seen, especially NFPs more than FJs, but I think I've seen a lot of NFPs who score anxious.
Yeah, there's a negative tone to these, obviously. I mean, again, I'm not too familiar with them. I think you strive for balance, right?
Right.
That's true. So there's the secure attachment too, which a lot of INTJs can be as well. So I see INTJs, they're grouped around dismissive or secure, like depending on the person.
Secure represents about 50% of the population, and it's considered the one good temperament. And the other 3 are considered negative attachment styles, which means something went wrong in the development or social adjustment stage.
Yep. But these are just patterns, not rules. So if you don't match it, no worries, guys. Don't get angry. I'm sorry.
Also, just a quick shout out.
To hell with all of you in the chat. To hell with all of you.
I would recommend here that people that are interested in exploring therapy, I would encourage you to do that. There's a lot of value that can be derived there, and especially related to your attachment styles.
Yeah, for sure. Finger snaps to that. And an INTJ, how do you respond to ultimatums or being cornered into making a decision?
I have a default response to anything that I don't have time to respond to, and that's no, or to disengage. It's like it's no until you've given me time to accept. And I think I would have to see some actual scenarios to provide a more nuanced response here, but I don't appreciate ultimatums, and I think they are rarely necessary.
Ultimatums shows that the party saying them is going through black and white thinking. So it's not a healthy response to things.
I mean, I can't think of too many ultimatums that have been proposed to me, to be honest. I'm sure something's going to come up, but I'm just sort of running the tape back, and I don't know. I mean, in terms of cornered into making a decision, I feel like I'm pretty decisive typically. I mean, that's different from, well, maybe the way this is phrased, it's a kind of ultimatum. I don't know. If someone's not making a decision, I'm more than happy to help make that decision.
When I think about ultimatums, I think about like, it's either this response or the highway, my way or the highway. It's either you do what I say or you get out of my house. Or
maybe it's the highway, you know? I mean, I'm happy. I just want to get, I want to get past whatever the friction is. If the answer is the highway, then it's the highway, right?
Depends on the relationship between the person. Because if it's a professor or someone with, higher authority than me that I need to succeed in some sense, then maybe I'll give some ground. But if they don't have any authority over me, then the odds are I'm not going to give them the time of day about it. And I'll just, make the decision that's beneficial to me instead of them.
Yeah, like my default is like, I want to be decisive on this thing. If I haven't made a decision on something, it means I haven't finished running like the simulation. And so if I haven't come to like a conclusion yet, it's not going to be good for either person. Like if someone's like forcing me to make a decision and I haven't processed like how I need it to, be yet, it's like, okay, if I make this decision at this stage, it's probably not going to be right. And I know that. So that's why I really don't like being rushed, is because like I know when the process is like complete, and I know when I'm like, okay, now I'm good, like this is what we're gonna do, or this is how things have to go down. And I know the percentage of error if before I've kind of like clicked into that. So I would say my response would be to let them wait until I have the choice, or they don't have to.
Yeah. I find ultimatums to be a form of conditional love. So to me, how I would take it is like response that is not beneficial in the long term, because if everyone's giving each other conditional love, then we're not reaching that state of unconditional love where, you know, everyone can just feel loved and enough as they are. And so
the NF turning it to love. Or like, at work, what if someone did this ultimatum to me? And you're like, Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, so it doesn't perpetuate a mentality of love that you can give to others. So that's what would bother me if someone gave me an ultimatum.
I think for the most part, given ample time before a decision deadline, I'm usually pretty good at making a decision by that deadline. So that's never really an issue if it's been told to me beforehand, like, hey, I need you to decide by this time and point. I'm not sure why, but there's an instance that comes to mind in which it's like I had someone who was seeking advice from me, and then they asked me, like, they told me the situation at hand, and they were like, oh, Bernadette, what do you think about this? And usually what I do is like, I'll take some time to think about it, and then I'll get back to you. Is that okay for you? You know, it's like, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Most likely it's going to be within 24 hours, to be honest. And then they were like, no, you need to give an answer to me right now. And then I was like, okay, in that case, then I might not be the right person for you to be consulting. You might want to look for someone who's probably going to be more like, they come to a decision a lot faster, or they can give you an opinion a lot faster. Like for me, I just like, I don't know. It's like, I just kind of go like, okay, then I'm not the right person. You should be consulting someone else in this case.
I feel like the NI-DOMs feel responsible for their decisions. So it's like, you don't want to give someone an immediate response or answer because you want to take in the variables so you can give them a response that will help them the most in the long term, or be the most beneficial in the long term. Like there's a reason ENTJs are so great. It's because they have that, you know, that really strong TE, and they have just enough NI to be like, all right, I'm going to consider it for a second. All right, here's your decision. Whereas with INTJs, it's like, no, we want to consider it for a good long while, make sure the variables are accounted for, and then we'll give the decision.
That makes sense. And so Andrew asks, can you provide any advice for an INTJ in college who simultaneously feels out of place yet desired by many? Did you have like ENFP sitting on you?
Out of place yet desired by many. That describes me to a T. I don't know what that means, honestly.
I don't know.
I need more on this one.
I'll speak to the first part. If you're feeling out of place, I would highly recommend finding a few organizations you could get involved with to see if you could find people that feel more like your people, part of your community. If it's a very small university, that might be hard at the actual college itself, and you might have to look online to find online or local common interest groups. I'm very curious what the desired by many part means, and how have you come to that perception?
There's a Discord server for anything these days, so just go look them up.
Meetups.com.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so y'all can answer that, but the next question is, Paul asks, the INTJs I have met, despite the stereotype of appearing cold and or intense, have an incredibly quirky sense of humor. What do you find absolutely hilarious? What cracks you up?
The question's so big I can barely see the bottom row of people.
Yeah, there is a...
LiJo, are you okay?
Almost everything, I think, is the answer for me. Yeah.
I have one friend who I've been friends with for like 10 years. He's an ENTP, and he's the only person who can speak dumb meme language to me. And it's just, I feel like there's no intuitive filter with me and him. We just speak stupid nonsense to each other that if anyone else watched it, they'd go, this isn't an INTJ. This is like an ESFP or some silly stuff like that. And it's just because it's nice to be able to just kind of have that nonsense where there's no like judgment or filter about it. We're just trading ideas essentially. And that's why I really like the NE dominant types, is because they speak that language. It's almost like they speak meme. Like everything they say is funny or ideas or something.
Yeah. The Enneagrams makes stereotypical meme lords.
And I love that.
Yup.
I think I've been trying to I don't know why I've found this topic fascinating for a while. I'm because there's very specific things that I find funny, but I'm what are those? How do I define what that is? And I realized it's very much just reality. There's things in reality that can just be so funny. You're walking through a store and you're passing a vase, and then all of a sudden there's a toothbrush inside of it, and you're just where the heck did that come from? And that kind of stuff is just I find it so funny. And it's just these and sometimes it's things people will say, and sometimes it's questions. I don't want to say people ask stupid questions, but sometimes the way people perceive questions on things, I find it to be so funny. And it's really just reality itself is hilarious.
Yeah, I would follow that up by saying, I'm sure many people can think of those in their lives that are known for being really funny, consistently funny. And I feel that on the flip side, not that I'm not funny, but that I can find humor in a lot of places that other people don't seem to be finding it. And I think it is because it's this humor in reality that is so present everywhere that when people say things, I'm that is no one else hearing this?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to do a mime routine on this question here where we're this.
I think
Can't do it. I almost fell off my chair trying that.
I think a lot of things I actually find funny, in my daily life, something I laugh at a lot of my behaviors a lot, if I'm being honest. One thing that I crack up a lot is filling government forms, and it can be really stressful for me. And in the moment, I'm why is this designed this way? Why is it this? It's oh, all these things. And then afterwards, I'll reflect on that, and I'll think, I thought about this so seriously in that moment. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And then that cracks me up. My dad also consistently cracks me up. I think he's an ENTP, but a moment that I remember with him a lot is someone was asking us, the context here is it's a bit, there's a bit of a political background to this question, but someone was asking him so your family used to be Muslim and now you're Catholic and your wife is Confucius. What religion is your child? And he just went, Hindu, of course. Of course it's going to be Hindu. And he answered it so straightforwardly. And I remember just cracking up because the other person was so shocked because they couldn't tell whether he was joking or he was being serious. And he cracks me up a lot.
Yeah. And they would call that FI, self-amusement. So sometimes the FI user is laughing to themselves about something that other people aren't really cued in on sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so I find with the commonality with the stories shared by the INTJs is when they're in that humorous mode, it's normally someone brings it out of them. So AsuraPsych will mention his ENTP friend, and Michael will mention ENFPs that he's known. It brings out that comedic side that INTJs have, but they're a little guarded at first. So you kind of need to make them feel comfortable to be funny.
I actually consider myself a very relaxed and almost at times even silly person if you can get to know me. My external is very serious side, but as soon as you get within that kind of realm, it's I'll crack jokes with you all day. I don't care. As long as it's not in the realm of work and I'm not trying to, accomplish anything.
We need to have an INTJ jokes episode one day.
I can't tell jokes. That's a different story.
You just react to other people telling jokes or situations.
As long as there's one Enneagram in there, we'll be fine. We can keep the conversation going.
For sure, yeah. What types of gifts do INTJs like?
That's a good question.
Yeah. If I were to be Oprah and I were to go you get a gift, you get a gift, and you get a gift, what would you ideally want that to be?
Are you planning for future live streams?
next panel?
I see what you're doing. You can't hide it. I find that I like gifts that are practical that I wouldn't buy myself.
Yeah.
So my wife got me shoes one time, and I had like 3-year-old ratty shoes that I'm not going to buy myself. I've got money to buy shoes, but I'm not going to buy myself shoes just because, why buy myself shoes? They're not interesting. But those are the types of things that I really appreciate when people get from me because I don't think about them. And I find myself ignoring them. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say practical too. Like I was like struggling like with my earbuds like one day, and my business partner like the next week like he like just like gave me a pair of AirPods like as a gift, and I was like, I wasn't expecting these, and like I was like, okay, and then I started using them. I'm like, these are so great, and like I use them every day. Like literally it's like one of like the few gifts that like anyone's ever given me that I use every single day because I'm like on Zoom calls or whatever. I have to like have my hands free, and so they were so practically useful, but I wouldn't have gotten them like myself, I don't think, or maybe like eventually, but like in that moment like they were very it solved so many problems for me, and so yeah, but it's definitely less on the sake of like, it's hard. I would say like I'm a hard person to buy like a novel gift for, like, oh, she would really enjoy this. It's really more of like, is this useful to me? Because then like I'll actually use it.
Not my love language. Not my love language. I feel. I honestly, I really giving gifts. It's just it's always been kind of a nightmare for me. I mean, I get a gift, I feel responsible for the thing. There's one more thing I need to take care of, and then I owe this person a gift, and I have this tally of whose holidays come along and stuff. It's my it's at the bottom of the of the love languages for me.
What is everyone's love language here? Just for personal
reference, yes.
knowledge.
Well, this is a perfect question to segue into that. I also score 0 in gifts on the love language assessment. Doesn't mean I hate gifts. Like if you want to, but I don't like gifts. For most people, I would advise, please don't give me gifts. Please don't expect me to give you gifts. This is going to be a great relationship if we can remember that. If you want to give me something that is very useful to me, food is a fair, I mean, you want to have me first send you the spreadsheet of what foods I like and dislike, so you're aware of that. But it's very important because, as Michael said, once you get a gift, you're then responsible for that. And so they've actually increased the costs in your life. There's something else you have to take care of or figure out what to do with. If you don't want it, then you're responsible for discarding it. And then there's the emotional cost of having to keep in mind the potential reciprocity in the future. But to answer your love language question, my top is physical touch, followed closely by quality time.
I think it's quality time. If I had to describe it, I think this would be as close as it gets. For me, the way that I receive appreciation from other people is when they show interest in what I'm interested in. Or we can share time kind of talking about or being invested in something that's really genuinely interesting to me. And that's like, oh, this person gets me, or this person's on the same wavelength with me a little bit, or they're at least willing to express the energy to pretend to be that they're on the same wavelength as me. And that effort is what I appreciate. Now, when it comes to gift giving, I like gift giving as an external love language for other people because it's like a lazy way to get out of FI. Because it's just like, here's a gift. Like I don't want to express emotion. Here's a gift. But yeah.
I feel like I don't necessarily desire gifts from others, to be honest. Like I don't necessarily want anything. It's like, and I usually tell this to a lot of my friends too. It's like, I'm already grateful that you're spending time with me. I think that's enough for me. It's like, so maybe inferring from that, maybe my most preferred love language is quality time.
Yeah, mine is quality time as well. And it's quality time, not quantity time, because I don't need a ton of time. That's just doing whatever. But if it's condensed moments like of words, like, yeah, really good conversation. Like we're on the same wavelength talking about whatever it is. Or like we're engaged, like that is time is most valuable resource, right? And someone is sharing that resource with you because they want to, that means a lot to me. So
I agree with that a lot.
quality time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, also quality time. Also, and I think on the rare occasion when I do give a gift, that's not a casual gesture. on the rare occasion, if I do give a gift, it does happen sometimes. I don't know about you, Jasper.
My mom is one of 7 kids, and so we have a pretty big extended family, and there was an expectation that they would on Christmas or birthdays send gifts to the various nieces and nephews. And I basically opted out. It's like, I don't want to get your gift. I don't want to feel responsible for writing you a thank you note. This all feels, I would rather have less resource from whatever gift you could give me and not feel any of those additional burdens.
Yeah, that's true. And so with the questions, I scrolled to the bottom, so it refreshes when that happens. And so I'm going to start at the questions at an awkward spot. So yeah, just letting you guys know. So the real Lydia asks, have you ever felt truly understood by anyone in your life? And do you think this is even possible?
There's a few ENFPs who've gotten close to that full understanding, I would say.
It's almost always NPs. Like if they even get close, it's NPs. My close friend, again, the ENTP, I would say he's like the one person that I'm like, all right, he fully 100% kind of gets me. But other than that, it's like very few and far between people that I feel like fully understand.
Yeah. Which
doesn't help that as an INTJ, I'm very private about myself. So it's not like I'm opening the door for other people to understand me. It's
yeah, you have to open up as well, right? So
right.
it would be a
two-way street. I'm not saying it's everyone else's fault that they can't understand me. It's just I'm a very private person, and therefore there's not going to be many people who even get the chance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's the ENPs who have the persistence to just keep chipping away, trying to dig in there. Like, hey, I see something I like. I'm just going to keep pursuing it. And they're not put off by any of your normal defense mechanisms. So it's really a beautiful relationship.
No, it just gets them wound up sometimes. It seems like.
They get all more curious.
Mm-hmm.
I felt understood by, a few other INTJs, a few INFJs in my life, that all of a sudden you click into the fact that you're speaking the same language, and there's like this very symbiotic like thought process that's happening. And it's the mutual understanding that you're cognitively speaking the same language. And then like that's where I feel understood, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this person is approaching this thing the same way that I'm approaching it. Like it feels so familiar. It's a familiar process. And that's, even if they're not saying like, oh, I understand you, it's like I feel the understanding from them. I like we're connected in that process. So those are great moments because you feel less alone.
I think the person that comes to mind is my dad. And I think that's definitely like two ways, because with his NE, he's very good at like, is this what you're saying? What about this? What about that? But I'm also very willing to talk to him. Like I make an effort to call him consistently, or okay, maybe not as consistent as he'd like, but I try. And yeah, like actually this is something that moves me a lot, because I am very moved by the fact that I think like my dad attempts to like give space for what it is that I envision, or what is my big vision in my life. Like I don't necessarily need him to fully understand it, but just the very fact that he gives space and he wants to like with his NE explore it, like for me, I'm like, okay, that's enough for me.
Yeah. I find it's normally the NPs who are able to open up the INJs. Like the NE users are like, what about this? What about this? This? Oh, I'll explain it and see if you resonate with it. Oh, cool, it's that. And that persistence at trying to guess at it eventually hits. And so the NJ can feel understood.
It's actually something I weirdly see with SFJs as well. And maybe it's not at the same level that the NPs have, but like my father's an ESFJ. And I would say that maybe he doesn't fully understand like all the intuitive things. He puts in the same amount of effort that an NP would when it comes to trying to understand. And I feel like to me, it's almost the effort that's more important than the actual understanding sometimes. Because it's like, as long as I can see you're trying, instead of just kind of assuming.
Very true. And so how do you differentiate an INTJ from a quiet ENTJ? There are quite a few approaches you can take to this. ENTJs are more action-oriented because they have way more energy in general. Yeah, so when you meet an ENTJ, they're more like an endless well of energy because they have SE in their third slot. And so they're going to be go, 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 go. I'm just going to test this, and then I'm going to recalibrate, and I'm going to test this and recalibrate. They don't really, like, they're more action-oriented off the bat, just quick into action, the ENTJs, whereas the INTJs, because they're energy conservative, or they try to make sure they're not expending more energy than they need to, INTJs will result in planning more. They'll like plan way more intricately, like what you saw during this panel. They'll have like a very intricate way of going about things to conserve that energy they have so little of, because they barely like go for social contact, as you've noticed from the panel too. Like their favorite thing to do is, it doesn't normally involve people, but I mean, they can enjoy people, of course, but I find that it goes back to the low energiness, which is why a lot of INTJs will talk about doing things alone and how that gives them energy. And so those are some of the signs you can tell someone is an INTJ versus ENTJ.
I suspect there might also be differences due to the fact, like, if you start off with a TE function versus an NI and having TEFI in the middle, I feel like I can, how do I say, I'm not entirely sold on, this isn't something that I've like fully fleshed out, but I can actually, like, how do I say, I notice it in my interactions when I'm talking to someone who's maybe a lead TE or a lead FI, TI, or FE, like they lead with a judging function versus an observing function. Like, I don't know why, but I can pick up on the dynamic. So I figured that might factor in for differentiating.
Yeah.
The general decisiveness of the rationals versus their rationals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Oops, that was not a question. And so, are you narcissistic?
I wouldn't say so, but I do think I am selfish with a lot of things in my life. But I think selfish and narcissistic are two entirely separate constructs.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how are we defining narcissism? I think I've always been confident and comfortable in myself. And so for a society that seems to be more self-conscious and less comfortable with how they exist, someone that has just a stable baseline level of self-confidence can read to them as self-obsessed.
True.
So I think by contrast, it might appear that way, but I don't. All of the actions, most of the actions in my life are to serve a greater good ultimately, and so I don't think someone that is narcissistic could necessarily have that as a guiding force.
Well said. Another point to add to this, because ENTJs have SE in third slot, they're more flexible and adaptable in the moment without needing to always plan so much ahead. So you'll notice more of that ease with just like if a curveball comes to them, an ENTJ will kind of enjoy that sometimes, whereas the INTJ will kind of see it as a throwing them off their direction more. So back to this.
I think INTJs can be narcissistic, but I don't think it's like a qualifier of the type.
Just like any type. Yeah. I think people tend to overuse the term narcissist just when they don't understand maybe someone's cognitive process, and not saying that there aren't narcissists, but I think it is an overused term. And I can see why some people might have, like, for the reasons that everyone's saying, you know, there is a baseline of confidence that we have, but it's not coming from the same side as where a narcissist would be coming from. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've got that pesky feeling function back there. So I think especially younger INTJs can tend to withdraw into ego and put a wall up. I know I used to do this, and I think that can come off as very self-absorbed and narcissistic, egomaniacal, and it's a defense. But for me, it feels it was always a defensive move.
I find that the types with FI either first or last are the most prone to like genuine narcissism. So like the ETJs and the IFPs. And well, I think there's like correlations between all the disorders and types in general. But I think like the ones who have FI and such a strong conscious or unconscious pull are the ones who might be more prone to actually having that self view that is very strong. Whereas with INTJs, it's like they're confident about it, but they're also not like consciously attached to it, if that makes sense.
What's a healthy way for INTJs to deal with their pent-up emotions? Journaling? Yeah,
I would recommend journaling. It's been something that I've consistently done, and it's helped out a lot in my case. Sometimes it's like I'll listen to a song and it'll hit with a certain emotion, and I'm like, okay, yes. And then I'll listen to that song on repeat while journaling. And then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get out all that emotion here. That's it, you know. And then I might decide afterwards, as I said, like to reflect back on it in a different emotional state. Like I think of it as kind of like perspective shifting with those different emotional states. And then from there, sometimes it is worth going deeper and understanding, like, what is this emotion telling me about what I like or dislike, you know? But sometimes, like, there are some emotions you don't need to act on necessarily. Like, you can just give them space to be, observe them, and then they'll pass, you know, you sleep on it. And then the next day you don't have those emotions with the same intensity. Yeah, so it's like I like to journal. Sometimes I'll listen to a song on loop that really hits with that emotion. And then afterwards I'll think about, like, what is this emotion telling me in terms of what I like or dislike? What do I need to do with this emotion? And sometimes there is nothing to do about that emotion too.
Yeah. So what you deny multiplies. So the best way to deal with pent-up emotions is to address instead of suppress. Yeah. And you can do that through journaling or meditation if you're Michael and you love meditation.
Well, I was going to say, so I feel like the honest answer is often, and I think this has come up in the answers so far, is to deal with them alone. I think I feel like that's often the case. I think active imagination is a good technique for actually directly confronting whatever is in there, because sometimes we might not really know. We'd be very confident that we do know it's in there, but you don't until you really set the time aside.
Yeah. I will say, like, FI likes to process emotions alone. And so what will happen is sometimes you don't know what the INTJ is feeling. There's kind of like a fortress around that because they already process it alone. So when you're with people, you don't always know what they're going through, because it can be concealed if it's all processed alone. Yeah.
I would say an important first step is, as an INTJ, to acknowledge that you have emotions, because sometimes there can be a tendency to not acknowledge that, and if you haven't developed any awareness around that, they can just build up. And as this question references emotions being pent up, if you first say, okay, I do have feelings, it's okay for me to feel them, can I find a safe container for me to process that? And that usually is alone. It's usually set up sensorially in a very specific way. But I find that if I'm able to lean into the emotion, I can feel it very deeply, and it's often a very brief processing experience. And sometimes I will be talking about that experience with an ENFP friend, or maybe we're processing a similar emotion at the same time. And I'll start and finish in the span of 1 minute. And I'm like, okay, I feel good now. And she is like, what? This is going to take days for me to work through. So it's, I think there has to be the space crafted for that. And then the willingness to lean into that once you have created what feels safe for you.
Interesting. And so what makes FI play for you?
So what exactly does that mean? I'm not.
Does
What
anyone
makes
have any
our feeling function like come out and play? Is that the gist of
Probably.
it? I mean,
Yeah, how do you draw out an INTJ's FI?
You don't. You wait for it to come to you.
So like a cat, like you can't bring a cat to you, you have to wait for the cat to want to be pet.
I also think, like, if we're talking like about a person, if we see that, like, if we're in like T zone, like NT zone, it isn't with another person, it doesn't leave a lot of space for F all the time. Like, but if we see the other person is like using their feeling function, or that they're like open, like the environment is presenting itself in a way that like is conducive of a feeling function, then it's like, okay, well then I can throw this in here, because the environment, the person, the context is, it makes sense to allow FI to like peek its head out here. You know, it's like, we're not going to peek our FI out at like a business meeting, you know, or like in a context that doesn't make sense. So the context, person, situation makes sense.
Anyone else?
I think, how do I say, like, to this point, like, I have a friend who I've talked to for a really long time, and I believe that she might be an ISFJ. And then I remembered, like, she was asking me, like, how do I draw that emotion out of you? And then I just told her, like, I'm not sure if there's anything you can do to draw it out, so long as you consistently provide a safe space. At some point, sometimes I'll express it, you know. But I do notice that music, like for me, like that's a big one, in which it's like certain musical pieces I'll listen to, and then I'm like, oh yes, this resonates with me. But usually a lot of the times I think it might come out with an I, in which it's like I start imagining like, oh, there's this fantasy world, and then I start writing a story about it based off of what I'm imagining from that. So I guess to that question, music, I think, in my case.
I'm the same way. A lot of the times, like when I'm actually like feeling FI, it's usually in some sort of imaginary mental scenario, which is very much spurred on by things like music as well. And earlier you mentioned that sometimes you'll like loop a song, and I'll do the same things if I'm going on a walk or something. Sometimes if I am in like an FI mode, and for me, it's because it's almost like that song catches the feeling or thought process that you're trying to stay within. So that way you can keep that mental scenario going, you know, while you're processing it.
Yeah, I also think of like aesthetic experience because it's like out of body when you're really vibing. And I feel like anytime that I'm embodied, there's always going to be a kind of guardedness there. So I think that any sort of the really intense kind of meaningful, immersive kind of aesthetic experiences, I think will bring that out, just because it's sort of a release from, this is rare, but a release from the embodiment that I'd peg to our inferior function more than anything.
Makes sense. And so do INTJs ever struggle with accomplishing things? Are they ever lazy?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
INTJs can be, I swear, they can be some of the laziest people. They just do their best to make other people think they're not lazy. Like 90% of my day, I can be doing nothing. And then the other 10%, I'm like super hyper efficient. And then I'll have a professor who's like, all right, you've got 1 week to do this thing. And on the last day, in the last like 5 hours, I'll just quickly throw it together, whatever. And he's like, oh man, it looks like you put a lot of work into this. And I'm like, yep, you know me, always putting in that hard work.
I feel like we're revealing way too much right now, but I 100% agree with everything.
Joyce, you'll need to cut this from the final.
Maybe this is also like a distinguisher between like TE in first or like for INTJs, because I'm actually, for the most part, I'm not always in go, go, go mode. It's very like selective spurts of time. You know, it's like, like recalling back my high school days, like I would just like, if there was an essay due, I knew that it would take me roughly an hour to like complete that. And then I would just spend my entire day at the beach, just like daydreaming with a book. And then it's like until 1 hour before the deadline, I was like, okay, time to get working.
Yeah.
I will say I would usually do it actually the 1 day before. So if I had a week, I would do it 1 day before the deadline in case something came up. So I had the fallback plan. But most of the time I would like leave it pretty close to that deadline period.
I think I used to think that I would like look at like the ENPs in my life and the INPs in my life, and compared to them, I felt like I was like really productive because I would finish things, and sometimes they would never finish the thing. You know, they would just have like a lot of open things forever. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm productive. And then like I met some more like SE users, and I was like, oh no, like I'm like the laziest person. Like I will do everything to expend the least amount of energy possible. And if it requires too much energy, like I'm just not doing it. And so the whole game to me is just like how energy efficient, like how can I look like I did the most, but actually do the least? That is the game. And like, I'm very good at playing that game. But yeah, my perception was totally off. I mean, I work with an ISTP, and like he kicks my butt on sensory all the time. He's like, where's your output? Like, what has changed? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I thought I was working on things when I wasn't.
Everyone's productive until they meet an ESTJ. And then you're not productive anymore.
Yeah, I think it's like like whenever it's like there's like, okay, you need to complete this by this time, I'll get it in by that time. But then it's like the period before that, it's not necessarily filled with like, let's do this, then this, then this, then this. It's like, okay, I'll get it in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, how much can I get away with?
Well, I'd add to, when it comes to accomplishing things, I think it's very real that you have to have faith in the intuitive function, and things are, whatever's on the list, it's kind of working itself out in the background to some extent. And I know when there's a lot on the list, and I'm not actively, attacking everything that I need to do. One is I get down on myself because I feel lazy, like I should be doing things, but it also drains my battery because a lot of these things are sort of, the gears are turning somewhere. And a lot of times I'll sit down at the last minute, and if I can keep that confidence up, then a lot of things are just there, and it's like something will accomplish itself. But if I get very third person with myself and and start feeling lazy, then I just start to spin out, and it will put me down. It will put me in bed for days or weeks at a time. Hard to explain, but
is it part of like the NI background processing thing? But something that used to help me was actually taking naps. Like if I got really into something, it actually helps me to like step back and take a nap. And then often like after, it's like my energy is replenished, but I also like it clicks better.
Every day for me. Yeah.
I understand people who can nap. I can barely sleep. It's a gift.
Yeah, it is a true gift. And so are INTJs elitists? Sounds like a bit of a socionics type of reference, because the Gamma Quadra is known as elitist. So I'm wondering, testing that hypothesis right now.
They can be prone to elitism. I think that's the struggle with a lot of these very general questions. It's like, no, of course, not every INTJ is an elitist, but
have I identified as such in the past? Sure. Yeah. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I still will when it comes to certain topics. I wouldn't define myself by the word, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, any type with like high TE is going to be kind of like comparing their competency against other people near them. And if you're doing that, obviously there's going to be a point where you see people who are like way down there and you're like, are they worth my time type of thing. But then mature TJs learn how to, not make themselves jerks when they do that.
Makes sense. And what do you find is the utility for SE in your life?
A lot of times. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that utility is such a TE way of looking at SE, and I think it's one of the parts of my personality where it doesn't have to be as efficiency focused, and it's more about making sure I'm still enjoying life and the present moment. And are all of my long-term plans and goals worthwhile if I am not having some baseline level of contentedness in my everyday experience? So I would say that it's really helpful for balancing out what is otherwise this seemingly indefinite slog towards a future version of the better reality than the present.
For me, NI or SE is most helpful when I feel like NI is like really stuck on something. Like if I have a thought that I just am struggling to come to a conclusion on or something, getting out, going for a walk. I'm a huge fan of like martial arts and swordsmanship. But it's more so like a meditative style almost, where you're trying to like get into your body and physically do those motions. That can be really helpful for me to like kind of reset the NI, where it's like, oh, you've got a new perspective to understand this thing that you're trying to work with.
Yeah. SE is good for getting you out of your mind. If you're too much in your NI, kind of shifts you out of your NI. Can be kind of refreshing sometimes.
Maybe a side tangent, but I noticed that I have like a lot of admiration for people who can navigate SE very well. Like I remembered when I was seeing like, John, when I was seeing like one of his videos and he was able to drive and answer questions, I was like, wow, how is he able to do that? Because like driving can be a very stressful experience for me, in which I'm like, there's things moving, coming at me, and I need to be careful. So I remember thinking like, how is he able to like so gracefully do all of that? It's like there was probably a very aspirational period in my life in which I wanted to be a Muay Thai fighter. And I remembered there was another person in the boxing club that I frequented who seemed to be very good at SE, and they were able to react instantaneously to people throwing different combinations of like jabs and like different punches and kicks. And I was like, how do you do that? It's like I lag so hard because I'm like, I see it coming. I see it coming, react, and then it hits me. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't react at all, you know? And my take of like Muay Thai at that time, because I was very determined to get good at it, I would just practice one kick 1,000 times. But there's definitely that aspect of like, I want to be good at this. If I were good at this, imagine all the stuntman things I could do.
Definitely been there.
Yeah, I relate to the like, it's interesting because I think the INTJs, like, we'll be practicing some like something in the background that could be SE related for a long time and people have no idea. Because like we're like set on like figuring it out. We're gonna freaking nail this stupid SE that like we can't do at first and it's really hard and we see other people do it, like it's no big deal. And we're just like, and we will practice it and practice it and practice it until like we finally get it. And then like if someone sees it, they're like, wow, you're so good at that SE. And we're like, I've been practicing that same move for an entire year, but don't tell anyone.
Meanwhile, the ESFP was just like, and they did it. Like they just
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah. All acts of improvisation from INTJs were all heavily planned beforehand. Like they practiced it so much.
So much. Horrible.
The INTJs, even the INFJs, tend to be like really almost self-conscious about the SE, where it's like they don't want other people to see them in a state of messing up the SE, which is, I think, even more with the INTJ compared to the INFJ. The INTJ is going to be the one who like practices it over and over again because they're really stubborn about it.
Yeah. And they don't want to look incompetent too because they're NTs. And so they'll try harder too. Yeah. And so third try in a sad face tone. My question got skipped because you refreshed. So I'm very sorry. And I'm sorry, but I can't control it. So StreamYard, it makes you refresh it. So I'm forced to forget about some of your questions. I am so sorry. But if I skip over anyone's question, you can always rewrite it and we will answer it. So yeah, we're here for you. What are your favorite fiction writers?
Brent Weeks is his name. That's the main one.
I mean, I mentioned Hilary Mantel earlier. I think she's the best writer working today, at least my favorite. Tolstoy, George Eliot, Dickens, DeLillo, Thomas Pynchon, Shakespeare, and the other Jacobeans, John Webster, Duchess of Malfi. Shakespeare's problem plays, Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida.
And Jasper, you love your books. What are some of your favorite fiction writers?
I don't like to. This is true for books and for music. I don't have as much care for the individual author or artist behind work. I like to appreciate the work without even taking into account the person that created it. And so I could name a few books that are fiction that I've enjoyed, but I wouldn't have a consistent category necessarily.
Makes sense. And so do you think there's a correlation between INTJ and high IQs?
I think IQ assessments, as they are currently designed, ask questions in a way that favor INTJs and how they view the world. So
that's the right answer. I have a video on this if you're really interested.
Yeah, Chris's videos are great. And I would also say that a lot of gifted people, sometimes they accidentally score intuitive on a test when they're actually a sensor. I have a friend who is an ESTJ, and he got his doctorate when he was 20 because he's just very hyper intellectual. But he thought he was an ENTP for a while because he would score that way on tests. And so sometimes it's sensors who have high IQs will sometimes also think that they're intuitive when they're not. And that's like a mistyping to look out for too. But IQ, I would say, is not always correlated to type. Like it's not. So, or maybe it is, but you can be high IQ of any type and you can be low IQ of any type. There is studies done where there's a correlation between a little higher IQ and extroverted intuition. So that's a small correlation. But yeah, you can find INTJs of all sorts of IQs.
I also tend to find that INFJs will mistype themselves as INTJs a lot if they're on the upper side of the IQ spectrum.
Interesting.
Or if they're, if they are academic success, intelligence, this sort of thing, they might mistype themselves as being a thinking type.
Interesting. And so, question, do you talk with your hands?
You've been watching us for 2 hours, so.
I haven't seen the INTJs really talk with their hands throughout the session. What I see more of is like this, like this, or like this, or like something with the hands around this area. There was a screenshot I got from one of the ENFPs who was like drooling over my 5 INTJ panel, and she took a screenshot of all 5 of them, like doing like some variation of hand and face, like that. Yeah. So
I think they tend to be like this when they're passive or listening. I find that I talk a lot with my hands personally. Like if you go watch my videos, I'm waving around my hands all the time. But I think that's just kind of like the TE aspect of it, where it's like when we're explaining something, it helps to present the idea maybe, just when you're trying to explain things.
Yeah, I find the same thing. It's like if I'm kind of in explaining mode, I will use my hands a lot. They're waving everywhere. And it's almost like they're like helping me to get the words actually out. But also, yeah, in something like this, it's way more passive. And then also there's like I know that this thing is going to be long. And so like, I am literally thinking of like, how am I saving my energy through the whole thing? You know? And I think subconsciously my brain knows like, don't go flapping your arms around for 3 hours because that's not going to work out for you very well, you know? And so I think there's also like that component. But if I know if I'm doing a video and it's going to take me, 15 minutes to film, it's like there's a higher quantity of energy I can put into it.
Fascinating.
I think I do sometimes talk with my hands. Like I'm pretty sure throughout this video, I probably have. It's not like that. Yeah. I feel like most of the time it's like I say this, I do this a lot in presentations where I'm like, if you're trying to get here and you're here, there's this gap here and we need to make that gap, So I will use that type of motion a lot of like, here's where you're trying to get to, here's where you're at right now, here's the gap that you need to close, and here's how you're going to do it. So I'll do that a lot, but I wonder if there's like, it is something that it's like, I am like, I wonder if there's a pattern. I wonder if it's like, maybe like I want to observe more if like maybe someone who's like feeler type will use this type of hand motion a lot, like welcoming. And then I think like when I notice like TE types, they'll use choppy hands, like very choppy. And then people who use OE a lot, like NE or SE, their gestures will be like a lot bigger and like that.
The cognitive type and Voltology guys do quote unquote research on this type of stuff. If you're interested in, there's a lot of YouTube channels out there that I don't support it 100%, but I do think there's correlations is how I interpret it. Like, 75% of, TJs might have the choppy hand movements or something, but I don't think it's strong enough to create a one-to-one correlation or a cause and effect relationship.
Yeah, there's a correlation, but not all of them for sure. Yeah. And yeah, I am not a Voltology fan, but I do like the study of body language and type. There is something to that for sure, but I don't think Voltology is doing it right. I'm so sorry. Shade. So
don't apologize.
Joyce. I like Joyce to 2.5 hours in. We get the
we got the
scathing TI.
my TI critic. Yeah.
That cold shade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what Bernadette was mentioning when she was talking about how the INTJ or she will kind of go like, here's where you're at, here's where you could be. That's like conveying logical information almost. So maybe like TJs use it to explain like a impartial point, like they use their hands maybe to do that. And maybe feelers are more likely to use it to explain more emotional data. Who knows? To be continued with more panels. And so, do INTJs tend to overthink and doubt everyone's intentions towards them? Does it lead to paranoia that isn't based on actual evidence?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Chris?
So what Jung says is that yes and no. INTJs or INJs, NI dominants, are the most likely to constantly be searching for the intentions of other people. There is nothing that doesn't go through the intentions filter with an NI dominant, but they're the least likely type to misinterpret intentions. The ESPs, or the extroverted sensing dominant types, are the ones who are more likely to develop paranoia from intentions because they are bad at introverted intuition perception or gleaning meaning from the thing that they're perceiving.
It's true. And I don't think paranoia is the word here, but it depends on what you're bringing to. I mean, you can your mind can sort of bend itself into whatever's most like protective of you, I think. And in a lot of cases, I think it's easy. Again, especially, I mean, speaking of myself as a younger person, it would be like, how do I, like, what will make me withdraw from this situation? And a lot of times it's just like almost forcing it's the mind spinning until you hit on the interpretation that's most negative and most likely to pull you, back into the shell.
Yeah, and introverted feeling, FI, is also associated with intentions and reading into motives of people. So INTJs having both NI and FI will make them read into it even more. So just fun fact.
Did you fail the vibe check? That's the I hear NFPs say that all the time, but I think NTJs have it a little bit too.
Yeah.
Our FI is powered by the intuition.
Absolutely. Even the ISTJs that I talk to will doubt everyone's intentions as well. So there's some FI component to it too, where it's like, do I trust your inner emotional core or where it's coming from, type of thing.
I think like there is an element of like wondering what people's intentions are. So at least for myself, I can observe that of like, why are they doing this? What are they trying to do here? You know, it's like that type of like wondering. As for the second part of the question, I forgot what it said. Does it tend to lead to paranoia that isn't based on actual evidence? So my outlook on this is kind of like, if someone does something and it might not necessarily come off like the most favorable for me, like I might get like, oh, okay, that actually wasn't so pleasant, right? And then I'll think like, okay, but that's one isolated instance. That's not a trend. Like if it's a consistent trend, then I'll be like, okay, they've done this repeatedly. So maybe I should consider whether they're not necessarily having the best intentions for me. But if it's just one incidence, I'll consider it more like maybe it's cultural factors. Maybe it's the way that like we grow up, we express things differently in different cultures. So like hopefully that kind of answers the second part of the question.
Wonderfully so.
I think it's almost that the NI DOMs are less likely to attribute like malice to a misinterpreted intention. Whereas with the NI repressed, maybe you might interpret it as, oh, maybe they're trying to, do harm against me or something.
Yeah, generally speaking, I feel as though like I'm interested in people's intent, but so I feel like that gives you a more complete picture of who they are. But generally speaking, it's like as it applies to me, it's like I know that generally people don't really have that much time to think about other people and like have really curated intent towards people. So I'm like, I'm not overthinking that aspect of it very much.
Makes sense. And so there seems to be an overlap between a lot of autistic traits, Asperger's, and INTJ typing. Thoughts?
Well, based on what we just talked about a moment ago, it's almost kind of counterproductive because Asperger's is a struggle to understand intent and social cues, whereas NI dominants are constantly searching for intent and even social cues through social cues, INFJs and INTJs. So I do think that, of course, an INTJ can be on the autism spectrum, but it's almost like these things are conflicting, which might make it more difficult for that INTJ. I don't think traditionally that's the thing, though. I do think there's a common misinterpretation and stereotype that INTJs are like socially awkward or bad at reading social cues. I think that's, if you've hung around INTJs, they're very externally professional. You know, that TE really is concerned with wanting to upkeep a appearance. I think sometimes they can come off more cold, but it's not that they're misreading the situation. It's that they're disregarding the emotional state of the situation.
Yeah. TE wants to appear like a good resource, and so you're going to want to seem professional, and so you're going to see that with most INTJs.
I will say, like, from that point, it does play into like my sense of style, in which it's like when I'm going into a meeting, if I want to present more professionally, I do take the time to like wear a button up, comb my hair, appear neat. You know, it's like be on time. That is like, that does factor in.
So James asks, have any of you found that you have better emotional poise due to diet, like without sugar? Does diet affect you basically?
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sugared up. It's not, I don't think it's good for anybody. If you're over caffeinated, full of sugar, you got you got a handful of, I'm trying to think of a candy. Give me a candy. Lemon heads in your mouth or something.
Me who drank an energy drink right as we started this. Like, I don't know if I should answer this.
I highly recommend Smart Sweets that you can have a whole bag and there's only 3 grams of sugar in it. So if you want less sugar, which I do, like I try to not have much sugar. And yeah, there's ways to get around it.
Yeah. We might do a few more questions and then we'll end the stream. I feel bad for sucking on INTJ's times when they drink energy drinks to be here. It's an honor.
I drink them every day, so don't feel
We
bad.
gotta power up.
Yeah. It's like, oh no, social interaction. Here we go.
I actually do
it's
that
fine.
too. I have like an energy drink in my yeah. Cool. Okay, so the next question is, would you do belly dancing?
No.
No.
Oh,
God,
no. God,
no.
Pass.
I'm a male, so there's like a whole different, sir, some men out there.
Whatever the masculine equivalent is, the answer is no.
No. Yeah.
So a friend of mine owns a dance studio, and a few years ago, she was teaching a belly dance class there, and she's like, "Come on, Lindsay, like come to the class." I was like, "Okay, I'll go," and like I went for a few times because she was a close friend of mine, and she was teaching the class, and I just did not. I did not feel comfortable, but like I felt like it wasn't because like, I don't know. I didn't connect with it like everyone else was. And it just felt like it was a different vibe. Like I almost wanted a more, like a more SE experience in terms of like activity. Cause like in my mind, I was like, okay, this can be a workout, you know? And like, it really wasn't to me. And so it just wasn't my vibe.
Yeah. Okay, so fun story. In the beginning, I asked Michael if he could do a video where he's rapping. Okay, I'm like, Michael, INTJ rap. Come on, do it. Views. And then Michael was like, no.
Why would I do that? Why would I be the person
Quick, IJ, be spontaneous, huh?
to do that?
Yeah, that's so funny. That's my type of humor. Putting on
You like
INTJs on the
performing.
spot.
I do
Does
if I'm
it scare you?
prepared as far as performing goes.
I don't like performing, but I'm okay with like presenting, like academic conferences and that sort of thing, or like being on YouTube. That's, to me, that's not performing. That's not like an SE or extroverted perception type of performance. That's like me, here's my knowledge, or here's what I'm thinking, or here's what I'm doing type of thing.
It kind of is, though, right? I mean, it's its own persona. That's not. I think it's you're performing on there, Chris.
I guess.
Yeah.
To me, it's like a different type of thing. I don't know.
Presenting.
Yeah, because like performing, to me implies that there's like a spotlight on you, like you're trying to be the center of attention type thing. Where for me with presenting, it's more so like, here's my idea, or here's this thing that I'm trying to show you. Don't look at me, look at the thing.
It's at one point I was a vocalist in a band, so I suppose I don't really have any, like, it's not something that I dislike. So what happened there was like, we have flag ceremonies in Indonesia, and you sing. And then one of my classmates picked me out as a band member to be the vocalist. And for the longest time, I did not feel comfortable with it until he told me, we literally just need your voice, and your voice happens to be a music instrument stuck within a body. And I was like, that's right. Okay, I can perform now. It took the anxiety of like spotlight to more like, I am an instrument and this instrument is within my body. That helped.
One time when I was in like middle school, our each class was assigned like a thing for some like school event they were doing, and they had to do like a dance or a routine or something. And I got an F because I refused to dance. And I was just like, I'm not doing it. Like, you cannot make me do this dance that I don't want to do. So they gave me an F and I failed. And I don't like performing.
I feel that, Chris. Yeah.
I think it depends like on so like when I was in college, I was really, I knew like the importance of working out and like having, movement in my life, but like I was petrified to go to the gym and like be with the gym people as I saw them at that point. And so I learned how to hula hoop, and I would just hula hoop for hours. And if you're hula hooping for a long amount of time on a college campus, like the circus people will find you, like they'll come crawling out of the corners and being like, I see you have something. Do you know how to juggle? And I'm like, no, and I still can't juggle, but it was really interesting. Like, because I was avoiding one kind of sensory, finding another kind of sensory that kind of like lent itself around me. And it was interesting. There were so many NT users actually in the circus community, because there's a lot of like patterns as it relates to like a lot of these things. And suddenly I was like talking tech with these people on like how to spin a hula hoop and like various patterns. And like, it was just so interesting and cool. And a lot of them kind of came to it for the same reason. They're like, how do we do activity in like the nerdiest way possible? And so, there are performance aspects that like lend itself to that area, but it was really, well, it depends on what side of the community you're looking at. But a lot of it was because, the people who I was around, it was like, how do we like figure out this cool stuff in movement versus how do we just do movement?
Right. I took Taekwondo for like a year or two, and I think the closest I ever came to like performing is when you had to do like your belt tests. But even then, like, it was, for me, it was almost like a TE thing, where it was like I was trying to like gain the competency in the skill as opposed to caring about the performance aspect of it. And like, maybe that's kind of what you're getting at there, where it's like you're trying to understand it instead of do it for the performance.
Yeah. It's interesting to imagine like a very composed INTJ doing something like belly dancing or something along the lines of that.
I'm not conceptually opposed to the idea of belly dancing. It's not for me, but I don't. I'm sure there are some INTJs where like that is the thing they've decided they want to be really good at, and like
yes,
that's how they express themselves. I'm currently employed as the director of music and technology for a small church in the Metro DC area. And pre-pandemic, that involved weekly musical performances where I'm singing and playing various instruments. And so there is a certain level of comfort with performing. I wouldn't say it brings me a lot of enjoyment, but it's not as stressful as it was at one point in my life. And what's really nice is that given that it takes place in this really specific church context, there's like a very specific structure that we're fitting the performance within. There's an expectation for how it will be done. If things go wrong, sure, that's unavoidable. You can't have a perfect time every time, but the deviations to expect are not so extreme as to be destabilizing. So I would say, as an INTJ, I know many INTJs that are in the performing arts, dancing, music, etc. So I would say don't let that hold you back. If you're an INTJ and you're like, you probably want to take a lot of time to prepare before you're doing it publicly, but definitely not an avenue that's closed off to you.
Yeah, you can do anything as your type. So there's no career that's withheld because you are a certain type. Like type is meant to empower you and to bring out your beauty rather than to get you to not pursue things that you're naturally pulled to. If it feels right, then it is the path for you. If it's your calling, then it's your calling. It doesn't matter if it's a typical INTJ calling. I
know like a lot of INTJs who end up in like performing fields will be in like music. A lot of people like type Jay-Z as an INTJ, I think, you know, rapper, performer. And I think that can be like that style of it. They just have their own unique twist. It's not going to be the same as the SFP who goes into performance. Absolutely. Yeah. So you can do whatever your heart pleases. You'll just have an INTJ flavor to it, whatever you choose to do. And so we have 2 questions left, and then we will close off the panel. And so as an INTJ, how do you hold your anger? This is probably going to depend on like the individual's like neuroticism levels. For example, I score very low? I don't know. On neuroticism, I very rarely get angry. Like that's one of the things my wife says she likes about me is I have like almost no temper. And if I do have a temper, it's towards myself because I've messed up on something and I'm angry at myself for messing up. But I very rarely let that anger go outwards or express outwards. And then if I need to hold it in or I need to deal with my emotions, for me, it's usually some sort of like SE activity, like walking, music, something, or TE productivity, like just get out of my head type thing. Yeah, I don't think I've ever lost my temper, but I think it used to be unhealthy and now I've been on both sides of the coin here. So one is you don't want to see, I don't want people to see me be out of control. So then immediately like you catch it, you bottle it up, and then it'll just, you know, those things pile on top of one another and eventually you have to deal with it alone. And but these days, I mean, it's if you just give it a couple seconds, it's always going to be something like anger. I feel like is always going to be just like one step ahead of you. So if you just, you know, hold it there, be mindful of that thing as it comes up, and you just sort of can breeze past it. Like in the easy example is something like road rage, which I never had an issue with, but you know, someone cuts you off in traffic, what have you. It's obnoxious, but literally just to bend your mind away from that for half a second, and you have no investment and no attachment to the situation anymore. So it's just that a lot of times it's just that split second, just catching yourself and just having just a split second of meta perspective on what's going on. Makes sense. So if you're angry, to do like 1, 2, 3, kind of have some distance from that anger, like distant, like, I don't know, time to cool off from that anger, I guess. Cool. And so the last question of tonight, how do you manifest the functions you don't have? Let's start with NE. How does NE show up in INTJs? Let's go into shadow function territory. My skeptical, suspicious eyes. I think, I mean, Chris was talking earlier about sort of riffing with in any friend, and I think a lot of that is NE. I think in general, I mean, I would say NE and TI are typically they can be very strong functions in INTJs. Dario Nardi has that assessment. What's it called, Joyce? That keys to cognition functions, which assessments are assessments, what have you, but it's this is all I feel like going to show up differently in every individual, I think. Yeah.
I think I notice maybe like more of that NE, to your point, Michael, like when I am engaging with my dad a lot more. But one thing that I do note is in my mind, I switch what I'm going for. my mindset becomes, we're going for quantity of ideas here, just sheer quantity of ideas, get it all out, and then at that point, then it's like there's less of this, I need this to be fully fleshed. But it's also because it's like, maybe because I understand that like with my dad, it works well that way. So it's like, I just shift and think like, we're just going for quantity of ideas, sheer quantity of ideas, and connecting whatever. Yeah.
Makes sense. Jasper, your thoughts?
Sometimes when an INTJ, or I'll only speak for myself, when I as an INTJ am asking for clarity from someone else, it's to understand how to better serve what they're asking for. And that feels like a very TE way of taking in the information. But sometimes I find myself asking for no particular purpose. I just want the most precise version of the information that they have. And I feel like there's a flavoring of TI in that, because then if I stop, I'm like, why am I actually asking this? I have everything I need to move forward. But sometimes there's an intense desire to have the other person present things in the most accurate way possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to say it's just something about the way that the question is phrased. Whenever I hear like functions you don't have, I mean, function preferences are function preferences, and I think if we're showing wit, brainstorming, throwing ideas around, multiplicity, grafting things together, and riffing and all that stuff, that's extroverted intuition. You know what I mean? The kinds of logical frameworks that TI comes up with, I mean, we all make use of those very often. And INTJs, I think are typically pretty good at that. I mean, function preference is a function preference. And I think we're really quick in the community, and this is my thing, but I think we're quick in the community to sort of reinterpret behavior as, it's actually TE when you're looking at FE, or it's two, my favorite is it's two functions that are in your stack that are working together. I mean, maybe, yeah, but let's be parsimonious here. Like maybe you're just using a function that's not one of your preferences, I mean, my FE is trash, but it's there.
How about SI?
I was like, well, kind of like looking at the whole thing as a whole. I was talking to an ISFJ about something similar the other day, where we were talking about like what functions like freak you out, basically. And she was asking me how I saw NE, compared to her having SI on top, and how much like that function would freak me out. And I was like, NE is fine. Like as someone who's NI, I feel like I can kind of control the NE if it gets like too out of hand. And then she was like, yeah, I feel the same way having SI about SE. She's like, I can control the SE because it's in the same, it's still sensory, And so, and I feel the same way with the thinking too. And I think that a lot of times it's like, me looking at SE and SI, like those functions like make me feel almost like more uncomfortable in my body because they're so far away from my first function in terms of like how it's used. Intuition is still intuition. What direction you're using it, introverted or extroverted, sure, that changes, but it's easy for me to connect with another NT, kind of like what Michael was saying, and interact with these functions than it would be for me to do that with SF.
Yeah, very interesting. And so thank you, INTJs, for coming out and spending a whooping 3 hours with me. That is a huge energy expensive activity, so I value it. We spent a lot of quality time together, which is most of yours top love languages. So it's nice that we got to have a shared moment of your top love language. Yeah. And I also really enjoy how you all are very composed, thoughtful, introspective, and offer great answers to the questions. There's a long pause, but it's worth the quality of what you guys say. So the pause is indicative of the quality that is brought after, because you're really putting thought into your answers, and that means a lot. And there are 3 YouTubers here, so go check them out. AsuraPsych, he has a great YouTube channel. He's a studying psychotherapist. And if you want to know inside the mind of INTJs and other types as well, you can check out his channel. LiJo, she specializes in objective personality. So if you like that type of content, but you also like INTJ content, you can definitely check out her channel. And she's got an assortment of wonderful things for you there. Michael, he is a really cool dude. If there are ENFPs in the chat, they're always drooling over Michael. Like, he is a crowd favorite. It is so funny. Yeah, he is an ENFP magnet. It's like flies to honey.
Okay, all right.
So
the FE outro every time.
If you are interested in the cool dude that is Michael, you can go check out his channel. He appreciates the ENFPs, even if he's embarrassed right now. So go check out AsuraPsych, LiJo, and Countertype. As well, Jasper and Bernadette, thank you so much for coming out. Y'all offered a really great perspective. And I enjoy when Jasper, you're talking about how INTJs can really excel in different fields. They'll just bring their INTJ strengths there. And I thought that was a very inclusive way to see type, a very mature way to see type. It shows your deep spirituality to be able to include all types of different types of INTJs and to have their experience still be valid. You know, remembering to mention that was fabulous. And it shows your mature mindset. And Bernadette, you're so adorable. So sorry. I don't know how it feels like to be an INTJ and being called adorable. I don't know if that resonates weirdly, but no, you're amazing. You're one of Michael's twins. So Michael has 2 twins, both Jasper and Bernadette. So I actually did a typing session with Bernadette, and Michael did too. And we arrived at the same type. And her answers are like carbon copy answers of what Michael would answer. When I was typing her, I'm like, are you Michael? Michael in another human body. I'm like, wow, that is super INTJ. And it was like really great to kind of dissect that. It kind of shows that when INTJs come from radically different backgrounds, they can still have the same type of mind configuration or mind wiring. And it's really nice to know more female INTJs. There's not a lot in the space who know that they're INTJs, or there's a lesser female population too. So it's nice to have your representation here. And so thank you, INTJs, for coming on, spending time with little old me. And I always consider everyone who comes on the panel as part of my family. They're a part of my ohana, as I always say, because when you discuss type with someone, you get to understand their thoughts on life as almost like a collateral. So it's a way that people talk about the deeper aspects of themselves. So it's nice to have these conversations where I get to know a little more about you guys beyond the surface. So thank you for giving me that privilege of looking into your brain. Even though your FI is so private, thank you for, opening up the gates a little bit and showing yourselves during this live Q&A. And thank you, everyone, for asking great questions. I love the questions tonight. And so thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you all in the next episode. Bye, everyone.